Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Friday, May 10th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. Now, right now, I am technically in the new location. I'm going to play a little clip to give you another quick insight to what the work we've done so far. But it's just fun. I just want to, again, shout out to all the people all the support we've had in regard to getting the new steps moving and all the support for the things we're dealing with, which I have an update on that as well that I'll give you before we get going. But it's just funny today to express out of the gate, a little personal note, how difficult this process has been, only because I've tried to work the entire time as best I could, which in most cases, it makes more sense to sort of just pause while you get everything going. As you guys can clearly tell, new background every third day, and things are shifting around. It's just right now, I think the sound is a little off because it's all completely cleared out, because we're going to be putting up some sounding and stuff, so it might be a little bit of an echo every day. But the point is, the work is more important than me worrying about the little nuances and problems we may have along the way. So that's what's obviously the point, is what's most important to me, and what we do is the work and the information. Whether or not some new person to the show might be, scared away by the fact that we don't have the right background, whatever people think is important. I was on a show with Kevin Barrett today, and frustratingly enough, I wasn't able to get the lighting just because I was in a rush. But same kind of point, that it's an interesting thing that we try to emulate a process or a institution that is something we know to be dishonest. But nonetheless, I think decorum is important. But on that note, here's a little clip that I want to show you about where we're at. And so last time you saw it, there was no walls. And so at this point now, we've got the walls put up. Everything, the sheetrock, which was the last kind of hitch, is now put up. Everything's drying. And so now you can essentially see this main area right here is going to be the whole setup, where one part of it's going to be where I'm doing this now, with sort of a background like I had before. That'll be my office right there. Oh, the other room is going to be sort of like an opening area to kind of separate people coming in from where we might be recording. And, a plan is to have something larger in there that we will also set up for Pirate Stream and whatever else. So just wanted you guys to give an update on that, because I'm excited about what this will become. And now an update on the other stuff I want to tell you. I had a really long talk today with our lawyer about the upcoming lawsuits. And unfortunately enough, there's now a third one coming from the same group, different person. So I talked to him today about this, and the reason the main thing, obviously, the rest of what we discussed and what's happening, and the balancing of whether we think it's worth it to keep pushing and fighting, which the bottom line being that I'm going to lose either way, lawyers' fees and what it costs to go through this process, and then if I lose, I'll end up possibly having to pay their lawyers' fees and all this different stuff, all based on frivolous, ridiculous copyright lawsuits. Now, I'm going to talk about this, not today, just for interest of time and everything else, but I'm going to probably in the next show or one after that I'm going to make sure I tell you everything that's going on with their names included. I talked to him about this today, and he still recommends that there could be a downside to doing so, but I just feel very clearly that this is and so does my lawyer, and this is not somebody who is necessarily, I don't know what you call it, mainstream or whatever else, somebody who wouldn't just jump to the conclusion that there's something deeper behind this that's going on. And he's convinced that this has nothing to do with what would be their clients' interests or their interests. Clearly, this seems to be dragged out to the maximum detriment to me, both with time and money. We've laid out what they claim in regard to how much they think these images that we've used, which, as you guys know, I go through my best, everything I do that I think I'm able to do, and able to try to use images that I believe are not copyrighted by somebody else, or things that I believe are Creative Commons. Most of the people in this field know that it's, and by the way, if you know of something, please send it my way. There's not some kind of reverse image search that you can use to guarantee whether or not something is copyrighted. There's obvious cases where it's clear, but the point is, on top of that, I've made this clear before, I think, and point to James Corbett's work, I have an issue with the concept of how copyright is done today, and how it's sort of a dying concept in general with the way that the world works and the internet, but it's still there, and I still do my best to observe that. Point being is that these lawsuits have come in regard to things they claim were violating. Action was taken in order to go, okay, if you say that's yours, then I'm happy not to use it. But the point is, it's not about trying to deal with that small issue. It's about trying to penalize me more than is necessary for whatever they think they're owed. And the point being is that when I show them the amount of page views, let's say, that this image was shown, their argument being that I've somehow made all millions of dollars from using this guy's image and so on, I divide that by the page views of the time frame and the total revenue. I mean, it comes out to like $50. Like, it's ridiculous. And they're asking for like 30 grand. I mean, this is like this absurd situation. And one of these, by the way, is something that I think is shockingly rare to people that I talk to in this field, like people that I've been doing this for decades. And they've gotten these and just ignored them. Nothing ever came of it. I've gotten three of them in the last so many months from the same groups with different clients. So somebody is targeting me in this regard. And now we're going through trying to make sure we're checking. I mean, I didn't mean to get into all this today. My point is I'm going to go into this much deeper, like I promised I would. And I plan on talking about the groups they're talking about here, because even according to my lawyer, these are ambulance chasers, for lack of a better term. I mean, we're talking about groups that do this. And this is their entire job. They seek people out to throw frivolous lawsuits out and hope that you settle, which is the interesting point. And there's articles written about these groups from years in the past about how that's what they do. And yet they are refusing to settle for us, even though we're offering far more than it's worth. So all that to be said, we have a long way to go. And that's another reason why I need your support. If you want to see I mean, one of the worries that I have, not to start with such a bad note, is that this will end up being a position where we are unable to afford whatever ultimately happens. Like, let's just hypothetically say we lose one or all of these lawsuits, and that will force me into something like declaring bankruptcy, which is not, what's ridiculous is that's not even remotely where we are with this platform. I mean, we're wildly successful in every possible way. The fact that we're hiring new people and bringing on new writers, I mean, clearly we're doing well. And this is the idea that this would be declaring bankruptcy is so absurdly frustrating, because it's only because of this manipulative situation and trying to hurt this platform for very obvious reasons, in my opinion. But all that's to be said, we're going to keep fighting no matter what. And even if I am having to do that, I'm not going to stop doing this. I'll probably flee to some actual pirate situation on a ship somewhere and broadcast pirate radio, and I'll still be TLAV no matter what they say. The point is that would be, I argue, the only thing they'd be going after, to go through this process in order to seize the domain name and the name itself and do things with that and manipulate the whole situation. But because of you guys, we can continue. So I just need your support in all of that. But more importantly than any of that, to maintain the work that we're currently doing, the work of Derek and Robert and Whitney and Taylor and Matt and Jason with the stuff on Twitter. I mean, it's just doing amazing work. So I'm going to start. We're going to go over today a quick section just to give you some shout outs, some work that just came out, and some stuff around some medical freedom conversations that I think are important. And by the way, I do have an entire, like a whole bunch of stuff that I've pulled off that I want to, whether it's in the same day or its own show, which is, I find difficult with how much happens every day around foreign policy right now. I'm going to make sure I take time to do just a focus on things that are not related to foreign policy, because there's really a lot to catch up on in regard to medical freedom itself, even COVID-19 conversations, tuberculosis outbreaks, they claim. I mean, all sorts of stuff. New COVID variants, new mRNA shots I mean, it's just crazy. And I'm going to have a couple of points I'll make today. But, so you guys know, I still keep track of all this stuff. It's all there and I'm still watching. And if the things are big enough, and I think like something, it's not just to keep you updated about the lies, but something really big is shifting, I'll always make sure I tell you and let you know what's going on. But on that note as well, make sure you're watching other independent media. Don't just watch The Last American Vagabond. You're rarely going to hear that from anybody in this field, but it's important that you do, because you need to make sure you're broadening your perspectives and listening to other people and considering other opinions, even from myself. Now, we're also going to get into an important development right out of the gate in regard to the United Nations and how this is a shifting. I mean, it's been shifting for a long time, but since October 7th, the conversation around Israel-occupied Palestine has just completely shifted. Like it's in its entirely new zone at this point. And I don't know whether, I mean, I feel that there are elements of this. Like, for instance, people like Francesca Albanese and different people that are parts of the UN apparatus, I genuinely think that they're fighting for the oppressed people of Palestine. Now, I could be wrong. I'm not saying we know for sure. I'd never speak on people's intentions or what they secretly think, because we're not stupid like the independent media or the mainstream alternative media. But I still believe there are parts of that. That's to say, though, that I think that it's, whether or not you believe the change, the shift is genuine, it is still something that we should be pointing out, highlighting, and trying to use for the genuine shift that we want to see happen. And realize that I think in media, government, the international bodies, there are people now that are beginning to shift because they recognize that we're going to, whether they do or not. That's an important middle part in that. That doesn't mean it's still a positive to see them being forced to shift, but we have to remember that not all of them really believe what they're talking about. Biden, anybody else, Trump, well, he's pretty much says what he thinks, which is good, but it's also bad because he's terrible. But the idea being that Biden, at the very least, is trying to hide that. I don't mean that as a good thing. It's even more disgusting. I like to see what Trump is, or all of them. But the point being that even people like Biden are starting to act like they need to do more, and Netanyahu is a problem. And meanwhile, they're still actively supporting what's going on in Gaza. And plenty of other things we'll get to, campus protests and some other developments if we have time, and we'll see if we get there. I want to start with a shout out to a really important conversation we had with Zoe Smith, who is a medical coder, whistleblower around the COVID-19 conversation. Now, if you haven't, I should grab this as well. It's an important conversation. And it got some interesting attention around, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, because she was on the CHD bus, I think, and she got a quick little interview where she was talking about some of this conversation. And all of a sudden, Alex Jones noticed it. All of a sudden, everyone's pointing at, which good, get the information out there. But again, I always highlight how irritating it is that these important conversations that we've been talking about, not just TLAV, but a lot of other quite prominent independent media, but nonpartisan, it doesn't get really picked up. Not by the, or at least the perception of that. And that's what's so frustrating. Is here is her article from May 5th, 2023. On our TLAV Substack about the same conversation. My Life in the Thrill Kill Medical Cult by Zoe Smith. Very important conversation. And this discussion we had on May 9th, 2024 was just about highlighting this going forward, and the discussion of what she saw as a medical coder. The thing I highlight in the interview I love is her framing of this as sort of a so you guys remember or understand. I would say remember because I think we've talked about it before, but as I write here, as a witnessed the alleged I'll just read it. Here we discuss what she witnessed, during the alleged pandemic while working as a medical coder, one who translates medical data into standardized codes used for billing, insurance claims, and medical research. And all departments submit their codes for treatments given and actions taken, giving the medical coder a unique national medical overview. That's the part I like, where Zoe describes as sort of a Sim City-like view of all that's taking place. So think about that. So all these different departments are all submitting these codes. It's going through a government process, right? So I'd imagine they don't think something like this is going to happen. And yet this, and it's not just her, many coders in these positions can see all of this coming in from different directions. And what does that give them? Well, it gives them this kind of 10,000 elevation view, or whatever the phrasing is on that. The idea being that they can see, okay, wait a minute, they're claiming there's all these cases, but that's not what the codes show. Oh, look, over here, they're claiming all these people are dying for X, Y, and Z, but the codes don't add up to that. Or rather, the codes are being misused, or all these different elements that she was able to pick up on. And that's what started her journey on this. And it says she describes the illusion that was created using this system and the many different manipulations that took place on top of the codes that she witnessed and are ongoing to this very day. As you know, improper PCR testing, cycle threshold discrepancies, combination of flu and pneumonia with the presented COVID numbers, and the conflation of very clear injection side effects with the illusion of COVID-19. And as I wrote, and I think this is important, and this is not hyperbole, at its most basic level, what she's describing is medical fraud. We all know that. Yet, when considering the full breadth of willful deceptions, and there's no denying that anymore, and deadly fallout, which we all see that followed their deceptions, this rises undeniably to the level of medical genocide. Now, I'm not just using the word genocide because it's something that's on people's mind right now. Like, if we're really going to stand back and acknowledge what a genocide means and all the debates about whether things are met, intentions, and on it, I mean, when we look at what just happened and all the evidence that's come out, now the intent part is clearly, I've never seen a genocide with more obvious intent than what's going on in Gaza and from Israel. But we know that this was here, and we can now see that there was lies, clear efforts to hide their actions, hide what they knew from us. I mean, even to the point of like, oh, that was another one, that AstraZeneca being pulled. What's funny to me is that's huge news to some people, and it is in general, but we've been talking about these damn same things for 45 years, or what is it now? Yeah, pretty much 4+ years. And it's frustrating because it's not new information. Now you've got all these people reeling about how we couldn't have known. It's what's his name? Scott Adams all over again. I was right, even though I was wrong. And you were wrong, even though you're right, because no one could have known. You mean except for the clear scientific research that we literally saw, or the many, 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 many doctors that came out and said, I can see this and you can see that. And there's clots and blood. I mean, everything. So were they just imagining that stuff? No, they looked. They cared. Or someone like Cuomo going on one of these shows and saying that, oh, well, we were given bad information. So what you're admitting is you blindly trusted things that were handed to you. That's not journalism, you moron. That's complete blind ignorance to what you're told is the story. Yet here they are trotting them out on some of these mainstream alternative media channels as if there's some new heroes in this conversation. Now, it could be that they genuinely want to do good, but overall, they should not be regarded as somehow championing this conversation. And a lot of people have picked up on this. We're now being redirected into some new situation where we act like, well, I mean, we pointed this out in 2021. We predicted this would happen at some point because it always does. Where at some point when they have lost enough, they shift into, well, it was kind of bad, and we'll throw you a fraction of the bone that is there. What will end up making it like, well, if we just had vaccinated more, or if we listened to the right person, or if it was the Democrats instead of Trump that controlled it, and people fall for it. Make sure you watch this if you want to understand the deeper, provable reality. And by the way, I'll actually include this too. I always do, because this is such an important part of this. In regard to not proving that this is a fake or an illusion. I mean, I take that back. I would argue it proves it's an illusion, but whether it's fake is up for you to decide. The point is, Denny Rancourt, his PhD and his amazing work on this has proven, and it's not hard to recognize this if you actually look at all the information, that the data itself proves that the whole thing was an illusion. Not that it was necessarily fake. I think those things are one and the same, but my point is that his argument is that if you look at the information, you can prove that you did not need some kind of a new pandemic to make it look the way it did. You needed what we just described. You needed the combination of flu and pneumonia that they've been doing long before COVID-19, and we've proven that before. You need the PCR manipulations, the cycle threshold discrepancies, then after that, the vaccine side effects that became COVID-19, and on and on and on. And you can almost statistically prove that this is what could have happened. So if you can consider that as a possibility, you must consider that it is something that they considered as well. In any case, I'll include these for you to read, understand, to watch, all with source material as always. And Zoe, by the way, is working on a couple new things for TLAV Substack, so keep an eye out for that. Now, also, just on that note, I thought this was hilarious. A couple of points I want to include. Daily Mail reports Pfizer agrees to settle 10,000 lawsuits. For vaccine side effects? No, for accusing pharma giant of hiding cancer risks of heartburn drug, Zantac. Just a completely different fraud case that we're not going to talk about. You mean on top of the thousands of other fraud cases they've been accused of and lost. But don't question Pfizer, because how dare you? I mean, it's just shockingly ignorant that we pretend this is not a fraudulent organization who has been caught lying about exactly what we've always been talking about. Lying about side effects, lying about efficacy, lying about everything. I mean, I'll just do this real quick because this is just funny. It's a good time to play this. I haven't played these things in a long time. Or where is it? Right here.
Is brought to you by Pfizer.
CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer.
Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by...
You get the point. That goes on for like 3 minutes. Not a big surprise there. I wonder why they were so confused about what they were handed, or not at all. They just blindly trusted it. Taylor Hudak points out, do not fall for this new scripted rewrite of history regarding COVID-19 jabs. In February 2021, and this is the point we're making, several doctors, and this is in regard to the specifically doctors for COVID ethics. But in 2021, there was a waterfall of people, and it's the shocking minority. And I say shocking because it was so obvious. That means that the sad reality is most of these doctors who were either too stupid to see that they were missing something, which is scary, or they chose to ignore it for many different reasons. Any of that's terrifying. My point, though, is that there was a lot of people that stood up, and scientists who wrote to the EMA warning about the risks of the very things they just shockingly discovered: blood clots, strokes, autoimmune disease, more in an effort to stop the harm. Oh, and there's another one, by the way, I'll talk about probably in the next couple of shows in regard to a weird and shocking, baffling autoimmune disease process that they're now discovering that they totally connected to COVID. Even though weirdly, none of them, most of the ones they're talking, none of them. The point is, a lot of them didn't even have COVID. Think about how dumb that is. So we're talking about an autoimmune problem, the thing that we know for very clear, provable examples can be caused by many different injections. Now I'm forgetting the term. Antibody dependent Yeah, how the hell is that possible? I've talked about that 40,000 times. But any of the number of the different autoimmune, immune suppression, all the different things that we've proven are coming as a byproduct of many different injections, including this. And then you can see that happening in a 90% vaccinated population, which is what they're talking about. And not all of them were even vaccinated, but they go, but it was probably COVID-19. Or not, excuse me, I'm mixing this up. Not all of them had COVID, as they admit, but they go probably because of COVID-19, ignoring the obvious culprit. So it's just so many things going on. Antibody-dependent enhancement. That's what I'm pretty sure it is. I don't know why that's confusing me. Other point I think is actually not surprising at all, but it's just too bad people didn't want to listen. Oh, tell me if the audio is skipping for anybody else. Okay, good. Sharon's asking in this chat. So the whole brain-machine interface, not the bad one, the good one, because Elon's doing it. The good guy AI, I can't even think about the good guy, great reset, whatever. But the point is, Tommy Mac says, I'm shocked, I tell you. Elon Musk Neuralink chip malfunctions in the first human brain implant. You mean like it did in the other ones when they were testing on monkeys and they did it on humans anyway? Yes. But the other point that I think is so ridiculous is that, so the whole point is about increasing in general, whether that's the idea of, more body function for people that are paralyzed or but it's or just maximizing your brain processes. It says Neuralink suffered an unexpected problem in its first ever human implant as the device began to detach from the patient's skull. Yeah, sounds like they worked this one out really well, reducing the amount of data it could capture. So it just sounds crazy that's what. So the whole game is about capturing data. Yeah, welcome to Twitter, guys. I think that's hilarious. But my point is that it actually decreased the process. I mean, it just seems so crazy to me that anybody is even pretending like this is where we should be, or anybody's pretending that we should be doing this on people right now. This is experimentation. You're watching this happen in real time. Now, another great article that just came out that Derek's going to be doing a couple of parts on. And this is a very contentious topic because this company, Bethany Christian Services, is very litigious. They sue constantly for stuff. So he'll probably get another lawsuit coming our way for this very objective and fact-based reporting. But the point is, it's just highlighting what people have reported and what people are accusing it of, and just kind of trying to seek out the details. A Christian adoption firm with accusations of manipulation, negligence, and trafficking. Now, you can argue whether that goes to the level of sex trafficking. It doesn't seem to be that that's what anybody can prove, but there are congressmen that are openly accusing them of trafficking, which, remember, that just happens to mean that, like if you're taking children from one location to another state in order to get them with a different family without legal process, then that's trafficking, right? And so there's a lot of very fishy stuff going on around this conversation. And it actually brought up an interesting, actually, I should have grabbed this, an interesting conversation that we've had in the past. It was, shoot. Let me grab this really quickly. Now, if you guys remember a conversation we had, and I forget exactly what this was related to, it was a children's kind of detention center. I think it had to do with migrants. And the point was that there was a senator that went there and got arrested for trying to ask questions about what was going on. It was a government-funded group, but kind of like tangential. So it was really little to no accountability. I believe it was Southwest Key, I think is the name of the group. It's interesting, the overlap to this in regard to how just the general concept of how government, even just taking CPS, for example, or any kind of children protecting services, there's so much that goes on in these systems that they'll admit that's just shocking to most people, that even themselves, the people that have worked there will admit that there's like a pipeline. Here we go. This is one of them anyway, or two of them. There's a pipeline of kind of foster care to sex trafficking. Now, you don't have to argue that that's because of the foster care system, but nonetheless, it's present and they'll admit it. And so we should be very concerned about how that works. Now, this is from an article in 2018 where we discussed the Southwest Key discussion. But here's the article discussing the main point, which is another Southwest Key employee charged with sexually abusing children. And this one's from 2018. Now, if you remember the conversation, I think it was, I forget his name. Well, just watch the show. I just went over it again recently. There was a Newsweek article as well. Let's see if that pops up. Doesn't look like it. I'll grab it and try to include it afterward. But where he confronted this location and in a very, very weird way was very resistant to even listening. They wouldn't talk to him. And the point was, it brought up all this, all the thought we were having around this time frame and what was really going on and the shadowy groups that were involved in, the Epstein conversation, all these different overlaps to this. So he's going to follow up on this in regard. And that's in no way to suggest that that is exactly what we're talking about, this group. It's just that there are now accusations here, and it's very important to follow up on these things when we're dealing with children, especially talking about the overlap to foreign policy. Like we've talked about with David Hamblin, these different conversations, the overlap with the Mormon Church conversation, or there was that issue with the trafficking. Again, same point about children being adopted from Ukraine. There's just all these very weird, and the point is that most of these people in government positions, they just feel like they're above the law. Even if it's small things, they feel like they're skirting. It's still, very alarming. And overlapping that with foreign policy, I think, is the important consideration from places like Syria, where there has been articles written about where are all the lost children from Syria, hundreds of thousands where people just can't account for. I think we know what's going on there, and I think it's very alarming. And I'm not saying we know who, but it seems like nobody cares to find out. So things like this that really worry me. So Derek's going to be following up on this. Also, before we start into the main point today, I want to make sure you didn't miss this. It's not new because this is like Tuesday for us. In the last week, and this is from last week, the 9th I posted this, TLAV has been blocked from streaming on Instagram. Right now, we're still blocked. And I guess it was like a 14-day pause, or who even knows why, and unceremoniously just deleted from TikTok, which I find shockingly funny because of what's going on right now, where they're like, TikTok is allowing anti-Israel content, I guess, unless you prove it, which is what I said here. This, while we're being told it's allowing negative content about Israel, I guess not when you prove it with source material, which is the same point with Patreon and AstraZeneca, right? You can say all these things, you just can't prove it, even though now we know it is proven and we're still blocked on Patreon, both Whitney and myself. But this is what we deal with, guys, is that we just get boxed out of the conversation. No, TikTok is censoring us, I think, because we're showing these things. And I think that really shows you that, remember, TikTok is not a Chinese company the way they're trying to frame it. Like, it could ultimately be that in the end game, but I can't see that. I see a Singaporean CEO, and I see very clear U.S. backing all over the place. But I also see Chinese influence on this. But my point is that to argue it's just this Chinese-controlled entity, while your government is trying to censor you everywhere, and TikTok seems to be this central place through which a lot of this content is happening, showing what's really going on. It's just this, so many people are so willfully ignorant about things that creep into their partisan beliefs. That's always why I call it a two-party illusion. But nothing new. Same old for the last American Vagabond, but we won't stop. Now, getting into the conversation of Gaza and Israel, I think it's important to, that's right, I forgot I want to start with, it's funny. Orwell shared this with me, so it's kind of a ridiculous story, but it seems to be real. Hundreds of hornets, they say bees in this quote, so I'm not sure if it's hornets or bees, I guess you can call them kind of interchangeably, attack IDF soldiers in southern Gaza. That's interesting. And I said, well, bees can't smell fear, so I think seems to make sense to me. And the point is, they say, I have never seen a similar case of hundreds of bees attacking like this. It's just funny to me. The joke obviously being that they're getting, both or what's the right word for it? In the narrative world, they're being completely destroyed. And also on the field, it seems like despite the fact that their body count is a hell of a lot higher because they're just murdering everyone in front of them, civilians predominantly, if not entirely. They're losing in every possible way. And everyone, including Israel, admits that. And Israel Society, Haaretz articles, they're kind of like, we need to be honest. Israel lost, and they're openly saying that now. So I think they're scared, guys. I think we all know that. So I think that's pretty funny, but it's also very true. Not that they attack them because they're scared, but why not make a joke out of it? Now, I wanted to start with this because I found this to be wildly entertaining. And there's a lot of interesting points to make about this that go both ways. Now, what we're going to see here, a great clip from Squirrel, who I also agree is, as much as he gets a lot of engagement, I think he's shockingly suppressed on this platform. And it just shows you how much reach they get anyway, and just organically, because people like us share it, and people, that I think that's the same with us. We're still, slowly growing, even though occasionally I'll see it drop like 300 followers and just have to go back up again. And I think we all deal with that. But I just don't care. I don't even talk about it anymore. The point, though, is that I think you go inch by inch, very slow, despite the fact that that we're much more reach. A lot of us do. On that point aside, this is a great clip where he's talking about Zbigniew Brzezinski, who, if you don't know Zbigniew Brzezinski, it's a lot to get into, but just look up the information around his ties to the U.S. government in the beginning of sort of like the 70s in regard to the balkanization of the Middle East and the plans that he put forward and kind of the thoughts he's had about what kind of laid the groundwork for what we're still going through right now, all throughout the Middle East. And what's fascinating about this is he's talking with Joe Scarborough, who is, first and foremost, he is Brzezinski's the father of Mika Brzezinski, who is sitting right next to Joe. And what's hilarious about this whole back and forth is that first and foremost, I think that there's an important difference of the old guard, new guard kind of conversation here, where you've got people like Brzezinski who are sort of unabashedly authoritarian in a way, like I think clearly, but like the idea being that they don't seem like they try to hide it. And they're happy to have like unfiltered conversations, a lot of them. And at least that was a lot back then. And some of them like this, like at this point, about how, yeah, we should do that, or we should occupy that country, or we should, that kind of a thing. And what's funny is he's talking to somebody like Joe, who I argue is like the new guard, which is not even meant to be a positive thing. I think these people are just puppets, quite frankly. Like that's the shift, is you went away from this idea that, it's like going from the War Department, which is what it was originally called, to calling it the Department of Defense, right? Well, it's not about defense. It's about war. The department, that's what they do. But they knew that you would like it better if they called it defense instead of war, sort of like Israel's defending itself as opposed to waging war. It's how they play the game. So the shifting to people like Joe and the way that they present it, and to be clear, obviously, we're talking about media versus politicians, but nonetheless, same thing with the people that are now in the roles today, like the people you see. I think they're bad at this in a lot of ways compared to people like him. And I also think that they're more willing to hide literally everything, which makes people see right through them to a large degree. So it's not it's kind of like I talked about Donald Trump. I see them as as very dangerous and terrible people, but I prefer Trump because at least he says exactly what he's going to do. So there's no hidden game. He's just being very clear about how he's belligerently authoritarian and will steal resources. And, at least you can be honest about that. It's like, that's kind of the difference I see between them. And what's funny about this back and forth is that the only reason I'm saying that is because I don't see either side of this as sort of like the good side or the honest side. I see them all as dishonest. And what's funny is Brzezinski is wildly insulting Joe, because Joe's like, these people are not that bright, in my opinion. And Brzezinski just makes fun of him about how you're so shockingly uninformed. And these are people that are essentially on the same side, really. What he's attacking him for is that he doesn't understand the inner workings of the real relationship between Israel, the United States, and the deals that were had. He admits that they did, in fact, riddle these deals with poison pills to make sure that that Gaza and the Palestinians didn't accept them, and even went as far as to make sure that they weren't able to. Which, again, he'll make the point to say that's not what anybody else thinks. Well, because you're blindly, just like with Cuomo, accepting what you're handed by people above you, which is ignorance. That's not journalism. So listen to what Zabrinski has, the big new Brzezinski, interesting name, has to say about this.
We do the next time Israel is attacked from an outside force.
And I'm sorry, 2008 for those in the podcast. This is 2008, which I find very relevant. Remember, 2008 was the one, off the top of my head, let me know in the chat, what was the name of was it Cast Lead? I forget which one it was we're talking about in 2008, but it was another time where there was a massive onslaught carried out by Israel.
What do we do at that point?
That's the wrong question.
No, that's not the wrong question, because we never get the condemnation of Hamas or Hezbollah. It's always after Israel responds to defending itself.
No, it's not. The problem is that this conflict has lasted for years, and the United States has been largely passive. So the right question is not what do we do when things break down. The right question is what do we do to avoid a breakdown by being engaged seriously in the peace process.
Okay, so I think what he means, and you want my honest opinion, is that what he's saying is we need to be more involved to make sure we can manipulate the understanding of what's going on. That's kind of what just so you get what I'm saying about how they're both sort of arguing we need to lie about I think they're both unabashedly on the side of Israel, quite frankly.
And for the last 8 years, we haven't been. And that's why we have the mess like we have right now in our hands.
You can't blame what is happening in Israel right now on the Bush administration.
Yes, you can.
No, you can't.
Well, Joe,
let's go back to 2000, Dr. Brzezinski. You and I both know Bill Clinton gave...
I'm sorry. One more time. Just look at this. This is just so entertaining to me. Look at Mika. Look at the camera. So we have to understand. So this is Mika's father, right? And they're together, right? So this is wildly uncomfortable because he's... they're kind of like, this is like the father-in-law, and they're kind of like butting heads about what the reality is. And let's be clear, Brzezinski is wildly more informed about what's going on because, frankly, he set the table for what they're talking about. So it's hilarious to see Joe act like he knows what he's talking about. And I think that's kind of what spun Brzezinski to kind of push back on him. But watch Mika look at the camera.
You can.
No, you can't.
Well, Joe,
let's go back to 2000, Dr. Brzezinski. you and I both know Bill Clinton gave Arafat and the Palestinians everything they could have wanted.
Such a stunningly superficial knowledge of what went on that it's almost embarrassing to listen to you.
It's almost embarrassing to listen to you. These are people that are put forward as like the in-the-know journalist, and even though it's like the Morning Joe, it's like the bottom of the barrel of the informed journalist or the way they presented, but still they present them as somehow being in the know, and they're, he's just like, you're embarrassing right now. I love it.
If you were to look more closely at what happened in the Clinton Camp David discussions, you would know that what we have just said is absolutely wrong. There were all sorts of provisions and catches to the so-called proposal.
Meaning that there were they made sure that it would look outwardly like something that was Palestine refusing it, but they put those there to make sure that it wouldn't work, is what he's describing.
And it wasn't rejected. The negotiations went on in Taba, and then there were elections in Israel, and Sharon came in, and everything got aborted. In the last 8 years, we had a policy.
Meaning that the person who got elected after that sort of put a stop to it. But see, the narrative from the U.S. government was to argue that was the... And what do you hear from Clinton? Both of them, by the way, and everybody else. They walked away. Arafat walked away, which is what Joe says because he's repeating things he knows nothing about. But it's not the truth. Isn't it funny how these basic realities that he knows he was involved, and he's telling you that's not what happened. Yet, nonetheless, the organized, propagandized narrative that gets set in stone that all these mindless journalists that are in the know repeat because that's what their job is, and they don't even know any better, say it all the time. And so a lie repeated becomes the truth.
In which we have proclaimed an interest in peace. Condi Rice has traveled 16 times in 21 months to the region, proclaiming, you must do this, you must do that, but the United States never exerted itself. So the issue that Obama faces, and that's a question that you raised, is, are we going to be sitting there issuing condemnations, whether it's of Hamas?
By the way, look at what the lower third says. Israel defense minister says country in, quote, war to bitter end with Hamas. I mean, it's just so insulting that we can't grasp. I mean, today people have shifted. There's no putting this genie back in the bottle. This is out. People are seeing it now. But think about how long this has been going on. And it's the same old cycle of nonsense. It's just that people are finally finding the courage within the power structures, usually because we're giving them so much pressure that they feel like they either see a benefit in doing it or they have to. It's now coming out. I just think that's crazy.
To the region, proclaiming, you must do this, you must do that, but the United States never exerted itself. So the issue that Obama faces, and that's a question that you raised, is, are we going to be sitting there issuing condemnations, whether it's of Hamas or of Israel or anybody else, or are we going to be seriously engaged in the peace process? That is the question.
We have another block, and I'm very excited about that because I'm stunningly superficial. Chief, I look forward to you educating me and the rest of America.
He really tried to make a joke out of it, but it wasn't a joke, right? He wasn't being funny. You're stunningly superficial and uninformed. Yeah, it's just, I guess that's the best you can do is try to soften the edge.
Hold on, the rest of America and the rest of the foreign policy community who have said time and again, Arafat walked away from the best deal he could have got.
Don't you love this? Now, look, what's funny is they try to roll him out with the music. They're like, cut him, stop, because it gets more tense towards the end. But what's funny, so what he's saying is basically to the person who was there, who was involved with the process, well, you have to talk to the rest of foreign policy community, whatever that means, just the general community. Like there's not some differing opinions. That's the point. It's like with, 4 out of 5 doctors disagree. That kind of nonsense they throw at you. All doctors agree, safe and effective. Well, how'd that work out? It's so silly. And the point is, he's just saying that this is what my betters tell me everyone thinks. So you're silly for not agreeing. I don't even think they recognize how ignorant that makes them look. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
America and the rest of the foreign policy community who and the rest of America, hold on, the rest of America and the rest of the foreign policy community who have said time and again, Arafat walked away from the best deal he could have got, and that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
Do you hear what he said? You don't have the facts, you're repeating slogans. I love it.
Repeating slogans. You're repeating slogans. He did not walk away. What he said was, I'm going to take the proposal to all of the Arab capitals and see how they react, because the proposals were controversial. And then negotiations went on, even after Christmas, where Clinton and Arafat met, and they were going on in Taba in January, after Clinton was already leaving office. And then the process got aborted.
Right. So it went on way longer after the lie we are told after the Arafat walked away. He's saying it continued past that point. So we've been lied to. And we know that. Joe just is not smart enough to recognize that obvious reality, or that he doesn't care to look past what he's told is the reality, even when somebody who was involved will tell him the truth. And guys, this is the point. If you look through this, I mean, for crying out loud, you can have that ridiculous non-debate between Dave Smith and Laura Loomer, where this is what Dave was discussing. You know, my point is that the information is out there. If you care to look past the controlled, government narrative managers that hand down information, which a lot of the mainstream alternative media also look to.
It's helpful to know a little bit about it.
It's very exciting, Chief.
Sorry, I'm stopping it so much. I know you guys hate it in general, but it's just so perfect how Mika she's giving him the hook, trying to like pull him off. Okay, guys, let's go to break. And he just doesn't stop. He's trying to laugh about this, but guys, this must be really embarrassing for him.
And Arafat met, and they were going on in Taba in January, after Clinton was already leaving office, and then the process got aborted. It's helpful to know a little bit about it.
It's very exciting, Chief, that you know things that the rest of the international community doesn't know.
If you're going to judge your knowledge by the sort of collective standards of 300 million people, then don't be surprised that you're embarrassed.
Wow. You know, see, you would never see this today. I honestly think that because of how, in what a worse position the entire establishment is in regard to narrative management, that they wouldn't allow this, because what he's really highlighting are some fundamental realities, whether or not you're talking about whatever side they're on. That, well, okay, if you're just going to pretend that this collective narrative is the truth because that's what they all say, and that's the people we're supposed to look to, well, you're going to be embarrassed. You know, it's the same idea that just because a consensus exists does not make it the truth. And in most cases, historically, it's not. In the case of going forward after the larger conversations, I play that clip all the time about what is science, where he talks about academia versus science. And the point is that the trailblazers are the ones that usually change the discussion, right? I think the clip, he says the best candle makers in the world couldn't envision a light bulb, and they fought tooth and nail to make sure it didn't happen. But the point is that if we would have trusted the consensus, we would still be there. Right? It's just so constant how that happens. So important clip. It really is.
I'm not embarrassed. I read the New York Times and the Washington Post and Foreign Affairs.
You should be embarrassed by that. you just admitted I just read the propaganda outlets and I repeat what I'm told.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to throw those away, and anytime I have a question, I'm going to call you up.
Let me spell it to you. TABA, Taba negotiations. Look him up. It will be helpful.
I'll do that.
Oh, I wish it was all that fun to watch. You know, it's so entertaining. And make sure you follow the squirrel, because I think he's doing great work on this. So let's talk about the UN conversation, because this is actually, again, really powerful. What's being done here, and not to say that we, again, I hate that we even have to always do that, but there's some out there that would then take pointing to what their decision is as a positive thing somehow to mean, even though we didn't say it, that we support everything the UN does, which no one should ever be that broad stroking, but it's very common today, or assumptive rather. The point is that the UN is a multifaceted entity with multifaceted opinions amongst there's groups and there's, but when you talk about the bot, like the entity itself, right? Not the different states involved in the voting process or the different tangential groups and the people involved in that, but the actual entity, I mean, all of it really, question everything. I don't trust any of these groups, but the entity itself, I'm very concerned about. I always have been, because of a lot of different conversations, especially when it comes to things like global government. But in the context of just the UN General Assembly, right? We're talking about nation states and the voting around topics. And so it's, you could argue that not all of them, like we said before, care about the Palestinian people, but I argue some of them do. And I argue that many of them just see an interest in siding correctly, being on the right side of history, whether they care or not. So here's where we are, where we're having a UN General Assembly. Remember that it's on the Security Council, there's vetoes. In this case, there's not. And the point being that they could pass this, but realizing that they would need the Security Council to sort of enshrine whether Palestine would be accepted in regard to the UN and its body. But we already saw how the the United States and Israel, being the primary resistance aspects to this, would veto this or vote down the possibility of Palestine being a part of it, while they pretend they've always wanted that. Like everything else. We want a ceasefire, veto. We want peace, veto. It's all, they don't want any of the things. They just want to pretend they do. But what's happening now? As he writes, Arnaud Bertrand writes, this is a big deal and totally unprecedented. Today, the UN General Assembly, not the Security Council, so no veto possible, will vote on a resolution that grants Palestine, that place that doesn't exist according to the Zionists, almost the full rights and privileges of a member. Quote, even if the United Nations Security Council fails to admit Palestine. So that's ultimately the point, is they almost full is the idea. And that, I guess, the only way they can go around it, because if they just said you have all the rights of a member of the United Nations, and then the Security Council vetoes it with the U.S. guarantee they will, there would be a discrepancy there. So what they're really doing is kind of, and admittedly, working around the normal process. Now, you can see that as dishonest, or you can recognize that the reality of one nation state vetoing what everybody else wants and acting like that's the normal process, that's the dishonest reality of this, guys. And so the point is, they're now going to make it in a way where they can give them essentially the ability to push back within the body. And even if they don't admit them, they'll still have almost full rights and privileges. It gives them a voice more than ever before. Now, it says this is designed to bypass the U.S. veto on Security Council and is virtually guaranteed to be approved given the overwhelming support that Palestine has among the UN member states, which is the whole point. It's only Israel and the United States and occasionally the UK that are pushing back on this, most always. It says the resolution would enable Palestine to sit among member states alphabetically, speak on any agenda item in the UN, address international groups on its behalf, and submit resolutions in its name. I mean, that's the important stuff. It even gives Palestine the right to vote in a specific context in international conferences convened under the auspices of the General Assembly, although they still wouldn't have the right to vote in the General Assembly itself, as you cannot do so without the Security Council approval for this. I mean, this is one of the reasons why a lot of us recognize the entire concept of the UN right now is completely broken because of I argue that I don't see a true need for what this is outside of the kind of awareness, let's say, of the reality of what other states are doing. There's a level of like forced accountability that can happen through this process, but we must realize that this whole thing has been weaponized against sovereignty for a very long time. Now, it doesn't mean it can't work in positive ways like I think we're seeing here, but it still worries me. The whole thing, the idea of the UN and the WHO and what they actually do very much concerns me, just to make sure we're clear on that. But it doesn't mean we should ignore the positive steps that are taken in a system that doesn't seem to want to remove what this is. And it says U.S. law indeed, and doesn't mean we should stop trying, by the way. U.S. law indeed requires that the U.S. defunds global institutions that admit Palestine as a member, right? So think about that, which tells you everything you need to know about the U.S.'s actual commitment to the two-state solution. They're making sure it never happens. It says, so we're likely on the eve of another major battle between the rules-based international order, which is the exact opposite of that, and international law, where the U.S. might, as insane as it sounds, choose to defund the United Nations, which, again, it's an interesting issue right there, right? Because I'm not necessarily going to be against that. But the problem is that all it's going to be, it's if you have a body like that exists, that doesn't go away, if the United States is not a part of it, well, that's a problem, right? But the idea is if this is something that is at the very least changed, that the problem is that if the U.S. just starts to defund the UN, it's going to act like anything that's done there, which, by the way, they don't care anyway. I was going to say doesn't matter to them, or there's no influence over what they do. It's a very complicated situation. The bottom line is that what the U.S. and Israel are doing are egregiously immoral, unjust, and illegal. And so if this is the only way we can apply pressure to these authoritarian, seemingly unaccountable states, then I support that. Now, it passed. The UN Assembly approves a resolution to grant Palestine new rights. Now, it says the UN General Assembly voted by a wide margin, which is completely expected. This was today, to grant new rights and privileges to Palestine, and called on the Security Council to favorably reconsider its request to become the 194th member of the United Nations. I guarantee you they're going to veto this in the Security Council anyway. Now, if they don't, that would be very interesting, because that would at least be a huge statement against. I mean, that would show you that the United States has recognized that the juice is just no longer worth the squeeze. We cannot do this anymore. Which I find it hard to believe that if they waited this long, I don't see why they would wait. They'll veto this as well. It says the United States vetoed a widely backed council resolution on April 18th that would have paved the way for a full United Nations membership for Palestine. Now, here's the main thing that they're claiming. Ambassador Robert Wood said this. He says, we've been very clear from the beginning. There is a process for obtaining full membership of the United Nations, the process they keep vetoing. And this effort by some of the Arab countries and the Palestinians is trying to go around this. Well, okay, so explain for me. This is like claiming that legal armed resistance or even the BDS movement is somehow a problem when all you're doing is saying, you can't do this, so do it the right way. And they go through some legal channel and you go, that's also terrorism. The point is nothing is acceptable. So if you're going, you have to go this way, and you built a 100-foot wall on that road, where are they? So if they try to go around that road, suddenly they're criminals. You're the one that's stopping them from going this route that you claim is the only way they should be going. Isn't that ridiculous? And he says, we said from the beginning, the best way to ensure their full membership is to do so with negotiations with Israel. Of course. You mean the state that has sworn like a death oath that they'll never allow this to happen? And they've been saying this for years, for decades. It's just that nobody was listening. And now finally they're listening to them and they're just screaming it at the top of their lungs. We'll never allow this. And by the way, they're saying, why would we ever allow that? Which you should listen to, because that means they've never, ever been honest about actually wanting that, because that's the same argument. Very important to see. So this is going to change things, guys. I promise you this will change things. It's just about whether it will actually have enough influence to stop what's going on in real time, because that's the hardest thing I have with all this. People are dying as we talk right now. People are starving to death. People are dying of thirst. Children are having their limbs blown off. Pregnant women are having baby. I mean, it's just over and over and over, and it's ongoing right this moment. The amount of children that die every single day is overwhelming. We're going to talk about some of that. Now, make sure you stay tuned to the end, by the way, because the discussion about the smart city will be the last segment we discuss. It's important, actually, because I think this is a really alarming, it's not new by any stretch of the imagination. It's not a new plan even, but it's interesting that it's now being rolled out, and Netanyahu is openly considering this. We'll get to that. Now, I want to start with an interesting point in regard to the campus protest, and really more so, not so much about the campus protest in particular, but what's been done around it, and a couple of points about what's going on. But I think this is fascinating. We saw the combating anti-Semitism bill, right? And I don't know why it's so hard for people in the paradigm to recognize, and both left and right, by the way, so there's support on all sides of this. But I think predominantly, I think there's more resistance, quite frankly. But overall, I think that what's clear is that this is shockingly unconstitutional. There's just no way around it. We're talking about people expressing the way they see things, the way they feel, the way they think. There's no way that that is somehow a crime. You can't say, well, if you say this about Israel, it's against the law. What you're doing is criminalizing speech. I mean, this is not hard to understand. Here's Jonas Vesterberg pointing out the Israeli-American council attorney, who is the best described architect behind the anti-Semitism laws, calls himself the chief pest control officer. Isn't that like, I mean, the idea of these overlaps where we were told, you know, like in regard to the Nazi conversation of Jews and the vermin and the terms and the buzzwords that we're always talking about, how almost ubiquitously we have seen the same language, the same framing, the same actions currently been done by Zionists in regard to Palestinians. I've shown you the images of Elon Levy and Eli David and showing Palestinians as rats. And I mean, almost identical propaganda from what the Nazis did about Jews. And how do you even do that as a Jewish person while claiming that it's about defending yourselves against Nazis? I mean, crazy. Because these are bad, bad people, guys. And remember, historically, that aligned themselves with Nazi Germany even after the final solution. That's the Lehigh Party. That's one of the founding elements of Zionism. And since I mentioned that, I'll include this so you guys can read it. Remember, this is from a Haaretz article that explicitly discusses this. Zettler's interrogation occurred about 2 weeks after the Wannsee conference in Berlin, in which Nazi officials discussed the implementation of the final solution. And the point is, this article is discussing the reality that the Zionist organization was aligning itself with Nazi Germany. It's an important thing to realize. Now, back to the point on this. It's another example of this. You have somebody who is a proud Zionist, a proud supporter of Israel, that is openly saying he's the chief pest control officer in regard to, as he writes, and this is the actual article itself, Zionist billionaire and Israeli government behind anti-Semitism laws, which they're proudly discussing, guys. It's open. Why? Because we're stopping racism. Well, or you can more aptly understand that even if you think that's what they're doing, which it's not, it's creating racism, you can recognize these are foreign entities dictating what Americans can say. How is anybody that swore an oath to the Constitution, anybody in Congress, anybody who is even fighting for Americans pretending this is okay? I don't care what you're talking about. I don't care if you're literally passing a law that says you can't. I mean, take the worst thing you think you can say specifically and in open hatred of Jewish people. I would call you a disgusting person for saying it, but I would fight for your right to be able to express it, because that's absolute free speech, or really just free speech. We don't need to add absolute to it, because free speech means free speech. It's not free speech with limits, which is what they're trying to do. So it's terrifying to me that this is being supported by Republicans who 30 seconds ago were screaming about woke politics and identity politics, censoring you for your speech. And yet, because it's something they don't like, suddenly it's okay. Now, clearly, if you see my last shows, I'm not even talking about the majority. Quite frankly, I think the majority of conservatives are seeing this and are uncomfortable by this, because They do see an issue with the woke politics, which I do as well, and I've called it out many times. But recognize the contradiction because they're not ridiculous. They're not stupid. They recognize it, and they're going, oh, hold on, am I being tricked into supporting what I was just saying I should? Yes, but good on you for seeing it and calling it out, because I see a lot of conservatives doing that. Same thing in reverse. A lot of Democrats or liberals out there supporting and fighting against, supporting both Jews, Christian, Muslims, anybody fighting for a ceasefire and calling out what's happening. But you see a lot of these people in central positions of power who are supporting it. And they're calling it out, and they're doing the same kind of thing. But the bottom line is that this is alarming because they're censoring your speech from a government position. Oh, and by the way, here's just the account itself so you can see it. Chief Pest Control Officer. Now, just my point in all this, and that is to recognize just obviously the claim. So what you're doing, if you're calling out Zionism, you're a pest, and he's a pest control. So how do you not take that as what it sounds like? But in any case, they're proudly telling you that we're behind this and that we're going to censor you, and that's okay. And you know why? Because as Censored Man pointed out, and we've played this for you before. Here's an old clip in Hebrew, speaking with a reporter, where Netanyahu openly admits, both, and by the way, calling it the Jewish lobby at the time, and very clearly discusses the reality that they control, or at the very least are not worried about it because they completely influence the U.S. Congress. And don't forget, we just talked about Donald Trump openly admitting that Congress is controlled by Israel, or it was, and it should be. He says rightly so, and says that because it's not right now because of Joe Biden. Remember, we just played that clip on the show. That's terrifying that a person that is about to be president, because I think that's who's the next selection, we've already talked about that, is openly saying that Israel should have control over the U.S. Congress. There's no way to misunderstand what he said, guys. He said, and rightly so. And Biden has been the reason they don't. It was very clear and explicit. And here's the point. Netanyahu in the 80s brags about how the Jewish lobby controls America. He says, we own the Senate, the Congress, and we have a strong Jewish lobby on our side. We have a strong influence over the general support. America won't force us into anything. Well, it's starting to change. But reporter simply says in the 1980s, we don't have America with us. Netanyahu responds, USA is not a unified bloc. So that point is to recognize that what he's discussing is using the division between politics. Two-party illusion, guys. It's divide and conquer. That's what we're talking about. He says, we have the Senate, the Congress, and a record strong Jewish bloc, or Jewish lobby. And he says, we have a strong influence over the general support in America. America won't force us into anything. I don't know why that's not terrifying to people. I don't care whether this was a Jewish person, a Muslim, a Christian, from somebody from the UK, from Berlin, from Germany, from Israel. It's a foreign entity proudly telling you that they can control what we do in this country. I don't care. And again, it's not even about America. If I was in any other country, it's about foreign entities influencing policy that affects your lives for their interest at your expense. It's obvious. And just one more point on this, and we keep bringing this bell because it's also something people are waking up to. Thomas Massey rightly calling this out. It says AIPAC Super PAC set to run TV ads blasting Thomas Massey Israel record. Gee, I wonder why. And he says the day after he votes for Speaker Johnson, AIPAC votes against Speaker Johnson for obvious reasons because the guy is a wildly pro-Zionist maniac, in my opinion. AIPAC announces a $300,000 ad buy against him. I hope Americans see what's happening here. Now realize, guys, we just made this point, and I made this point on a recent show I was on as well. Well, here's what we're talking about. If you don't remember the idea of lobbying in general, what they claim it's supposed to be, they swear up and down. It's not bribery. We're just funding groups that, political campaigns that we support. The game is that we don't, immediately dictate what happens. We just give them money and we hope they are the person that we just want to support. And then next time the election comes around, if we don't like what they've done, maybe we won't fund them that time. That's supposed to be the lie about lobbying. No, it's not what happens. As AIPAC just proved. Immediately after a vote on the emergency Israel bill, the Republicans that did not vote for it, AIPAC yanked certain funding. How do you not take that as AIPAC immediately influencing the outcome of policy? That's supposed to be the biggest that is what they swear lobbying is not doing, even though we all know it is. So here's another example where they're immediately after choices this is supposed to be a representative of American interest. He's supposed to be, and I don't agree with any of this, but he's supposed to be the living embodiment of the will of his constituents, right? So what AIPAC is doing is going, well, we don't care what you think. We want you to vote the way we want you to. And if you don't, we're going to pay $500,000 to have some kind of ad taken on you. We're going to pull funding for you. That's terrifying. No matter what entity, no matter what group it comes from, no matter what interest it supports, this is a lobbying group in interest of a foreign country who is influencing the outcome in real time of policy in this country at the expense of Americans. It's not an American. They're trying to pretend to be a U.S. group. It's very clearly in the interest of a foreign country, and it's no way around it. Now, let's talk about the campus protest in that regard. And how, first of all, just to see that this hasn't stopped. It's gone global, as we just talked about recently. It is a global effort. That's not woke left politics and George Soros and the CIA, like Alex Jones would tell you. We should very genuinely always consider that influence. Don't forget, we talked about the funding. Derek Rose wrote a great article for it on conscious resistance. The point being that the only thing I can prove, which is what we should care about, is a funding that took place from 2019 to 2021 for a fraction of what they're using today to one of the groups. And there are many groups on multiple group areas. And again, it's global at this point. There are people in Japan and Germany and all over the world now doing these in their own ways. And to just wash that away as all CIA and George Soros, which you know, of all people, I'm immediately looking for things like that, the hallmarks of CIA, National Endowment for Democracy, whatever. But as far as I can tell, this is not what's happening. And I'm always going to be on guard for that. And what we're seeing is a massive movement, which I can guarantee you is already trying to be influenced. And I make this point every time. Either side of anything important going on, you will find people trying to fund it, trying to influence it, trying to co-opt it. Again, I make the point I make about the Occupy Wall Street movement, which, by the way, this feels very reminiscent of. It was very clearly something that was an organic thing that started, and we can prove, because this later came out, that there was an FBI entity that rose to the top of this and kind of drove the whole damn thing to the ground, made it look like some ridiculous carnival as opposed to the real thing that it began as, just trying to raise awareness about the obvious problems that obviously, 2008 and everything else, it's very clear that these groups were criminals. But my point is, this is what we're dealing with again, that we have very clear groups that have learned lessons from the 60s movement, from the Vietnam protests, from apartheid, very clearly realizing that if we talk to the media of any kind, that we could be misrepresented. It's about trying to raise the awareness about the one issue. Bottom line, you should consider what they're saying. Don't blindly support or blindly follow anything. Question everything. Consider all possibilities. But if you can't see at this point that what this is drawing attention to is the most obvious crime taking place on the planet right now, which is no way to diminish other very serious crimes going on, like in the Congo or Myanmar or anywhere else. It's just to recognize that this is the most obvious and most central point that is truly unraveling their entire control over all the rest of those stories and their involvement in those as well, like Israel and the United States, that we have proven in places like Congo, for example, in regard to the diamond trade, in regard to mining of rare earth minerals and all these different things. But back to this point, breaking through news highlights that MIT students and grad workers have maintained an hours-long picket despite brutal arrests, as you can see in the image. Cops just randomly pushing students, which was crazy to me. Have maintained hours-long picket despite brutal arrests at the university building that houses an $11 million Israeli drone project. Why in the world are these colleges even invested in foreign policy merchants of death? I don't understand that. I mean, I do, but it shouldn't be the case. Now, they speak with the president of MIT Grad Union. You can listen for yourself. This is ongoing is the point. Now, here's something that Caitlin Johnstone said, and I find this to be really interesting. A recent discussion between Blinken and, what was his name again? We just talked about him. He's the Palantir guy. Ash, what was his name? That wasn't his name, was it? Let me just read through it. Oh, Karp. Karp was his name. CEO of Palantir. And the point is that they're sitting there having this conversation about why the protest movement is a problem. As she writes, Empire managers explain why this new protest movement scares them. A weirdly honest moment, and I don't think they meant it that way. The U.S. Secretary of State and a Bilderberg surveillance tech oligarch have both made some very interesting admissions about the burgeoning protest movement against the U.S.-backed slaughter in Gaza and the problems it poses for the empire they help run. It says, during a vitriolic rant about university demonstrators at the Ash Carter Exchange on Innovation and National Security on Tuesday, Palantir CEO Alex Karp, who, don't forget, is acutely involved with Israel in regard to funding using AI processes. Actually, I think I can pull that. Yep, right there. Or no, is that the one? This is an older article, I think. But we recently covered up Palantir investing in what's going on in Israel. This one we talked about recently. The PayPal offshoot becomes a weapon in the war against whistleblowers or anything that we're doing that they don't like. Let's do this. Oh, this one. Here we go. We wrote about it in the website as well, but this is just the discussion so you can look at it for yourself. The Bloomberg article, Palantir and Israel agree. If it'll load for me. Okay, I guess we'll come back to it. So the point is that they are working with Israel, and that's provable. We'll show you the article once it loads in 5 years. It says Karp is a billionaire who sits on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group and regularly features at the World Economic Forum and other platforms of plutocratic empire management. He says, quote, "We kind of just think these things that are happening across college campuses especially are like a sideshow. No, they are the show," Karp said during his rant, "because if we lose the intellectual debate, not that they're lying, but if we lose the debate, you will not be able to deploy any army in the West ever." So your argument is that these people calling out genocide stops you from being able to deploy military around the world? Yeah, maybe we should not want that. Here's the point. Thiel's Palantir Israel agrees strategic partnership for battle tech. Not surprising, as they're openly murdering children right now with this tech. Maybe they're uncomfortable. But it says everyone should listen very carefully to Karp's words here because he's giving the whole game away. He's making it very clear how crucial it is for the empire to stomp out this protest movement and the zeitgeist upon which it rides. Zeitgeist meaning just a term meaning kind of the spirit of an age, which I do agree that's kind of what's happening here. It says, at a time when most imperial spinmeisters are trying to dismiss the importance of this movement and what young people are doing on college campuses around the world, this is a really extraordinary admission from someone who lives deep in the guts of the imperial hydra. Such conferences are great for obtaining useful information from swamp monsters that you don't normally hear. Where was it? But because when they're surrounded by like-minded empire goons, they tend to get a lot more loose-tongued. I agree with that. Than they are when they're more aware that you have an audience of normal people. I think historically, too, they've been very used to these things not becoming so prominent because they're in these special groups. But today, things are very different. And some of them haven't caught, when there was the police accountability, the police cams. Remember, there was like a 10-year period, which still it happens, by the way, where they would catch themselves planting drugs with their cop cameras. The point was that they didn't just stop, even though they knew it was there, because they were so used to being able to get away with everything. That's the kind of same thing we're seeing here. And it is slowly becoming less common because they were continually catching them with all these crazy things. But it says, we saw this illustrated again in a conversation between Senator Mitt Romney and Secretary of State Blinken at the McCain Institute. And I just played that for you, during which both acknowledged some facts that generally go unstated by such creatures. After bemoaning Israel's lack of success at PR regarding the Gaza assault, Romney just came right out and said that this was why there was such overwhelming support for us to shut down potentially TikTok or other entities of that nature, with, quote, us, meaning himself and his fellow lawmakers on Capitol Hill. It says, quote, how this narrative has evolved. Yeah, it's a great question. Blinken responded, saying at the beginning of his career in Washington, everyone was getting their information from television and physical newspapers. And he says, now, of course, they're on an intravenous feed of information with new impulses, inputs every millisecond. Right? Like, God forbid they should be informed before you are. And it says, of course, the way that this is played out on social media has dominated the narrative. None of them really say fake news, do they? It says, and you have a social media ecosystem environment in which context, history, facts get lost, and the emotion, right there you could argue, but he says the impact of images dominates. Right. So all he says is facts get lost. He's not really saying that these images are fake. And the point is, we know that they're not. You could argue some of them have been predominantly coming from a Zionist position. I've clearly proven that. But overall, you can see plenty of things. But my point is that they're highlighting that the information they're seeing is changing the dynamic. And that's clear. That's why that's undeniable. They want to censor because they're losing control of the narrative. It says, and we can't discount that. But I think it's also very, very, very challenging effect on the narrative. Exactly. He literally said the narrative. Notice how he said the word narrative 3 times. That's how empire managers talk to each other, because that's how they think about everything. This is because empire managers are always acutely aware of something that normal human beings are not, that real power comes from manipulating the stories, the narratives that people tell themselves about their reality. They understand that humans are storytelling animals whose inner lives are typically dominated by mental narratives about what's happening. So if you can control those narratives, you can control the humans. They understand that power is controlling what happens, but true power is controlling what people think about what happens. They understand that whoever controls the narrative controls the world. That's why what's going on with all the mass media propaganda, Silicon Valley algorithm manipulation, plutocrat-funded think tanks, and mainstream culture manufacturing in New York and Hollywood. A few clever manipulators understand that you can control a society by controlling its dominant narratives. Our rulers don't think about these things like normal people think about them. They don't think in terms of doing the right thing or acting in a way that benefits everyone, as much as they love to pretend that because that's what you want. Point Caitlin makes all the time. They don't think in terms of truth and honesty or lack thereof. They only think in terms of what stories people are telling each other and how these stories can be changed in a way that advances the interest of the empire they manage. Post-truth world. I'll just leave it there because I want to make sure we get to the rest of this, but it's important to think about that. Now, this is an interesting point on this. Here's Wyatt Reed just highlighting exactly what she was showing, the hypocrisy of all of this. He says, we are governed by absolute psychopaths. No real principles, no moral consistency, just constant, shameless hypocrisy every day, over and over again. Remember the Hong Kong protests? The Hong Kong campus protests? Remember that? 2019. Here's what Senator Marsha Blackburn said. It is unacceptable for the Hong Kong police force to require the arrest of all on-campus protesters in a bid to de-escalate the violence. This is not how a free and fair government acts. It is how a police state operates. Oh, isn't that interesting? Here's what she says today. Reports indicate that leftists are joining pro-Hamas protests. See, they just go all the pro-Hamas? You mean pro-Palestine? You guys are ridiculous cartoon cutouts. He says their goal is to spread disorder and violence on campuses and advance their liberal agenda. These are not peaceful protesters. They are terrorist sympathizers. They're just directly Zionist talking points. Somebody wrote this for her, for all I can tell. So wait a minute, but so it's not okay for Hong Kong in the same context with violence to shut down all of them ubiquitously, like they're all doing the same thing? Yeah, because that would be stupid. Here you are promoting that very stupid thing. So Senator Marsha Blackburn is stupid, or however you want to frame that. Tom Cotton, another one you know very well. Hong Kong's authorities have turned a place of higher learning into a place of violence by trapping student demonstrators on their own campuses. Gasp! How dare they? What a police state. Oh, here he is over here. If the campus police can't do it, the school should bring in local police. If the local police can't do it, then yes, the National Guard should restore law and order, allowing deeply troubling anti-Semites to take over campuses and their threatened Jewish students, none of which is happening, by the way, because we've proven to you, as everybody can see with a brain, that most of these protests are being put on by Jewish organizations. Some of them are predominantly Jewish. Or at the very least, you can show a huge Jewish presence, and you can see Holocaust survivors openly talking about how they support what's going on. Isn't that funny how you can just pretend they're Jew-hating, anti-Semite, pro-Hamas, rape, blah, blah, blah. These people are children. And here's the worst part about it. People like Tom Cotton, guys, they know they're lying. That's the biggest issue. And Josh Haley and the rest, they know they're lying about this. Now, you could argue that maybe they believe the lie about some rising anti-Semitism threat, and so they justify lying about these people because they see it, but whatever. But they know what they're saying is not true because it's been dumped in front of them by 1,000 different people. Yet they still do it because they're not honest, guys. They don't care about any of the things they pretend they care about. Here's one of these examples I played before.
As a Holocaust survivor, my message to the brave student protesters in America is just keep doing it. Don't give up. We are doing exactly the same, and in the long term, we are going to prevail. I'm out from the beginning at every march, a small group of survivors.
And he's wearing the traditional Palestinian garb. That'll be relevant in a minute when they pretend that that's now the new KKK symbol. That's not a joke. That's what Israeli government representatives are claiming, that a Palestinian garb is now KKK level, despite the fact that it's being worn by Jews and Holocaust survivors. And they'll never call that out, though, because it'll make them look that I've never yet seen any of these Zionists go as far as to call a Holocaust survivor a token Jew or a self-hating Jew. You'll see them do that to just any Jew that supports what's going on, like Ben Shapiro, because they're disgusting people that don't care about anything but Zionism. But they're coward enough to not call out the Holocaust survivors. And you know damn well why. But doesn't that show you everything? Here's another example.
This is the first time I am using my full real name to stand in solidarity with Palestinians. And I don't deserve applause because I am too late. Because every single day that we don't speak out as Jews in support of Palestinian liberation is another day too late. I grew up in a Jewish American school system that was explicitly Zionist.
That was the point. Sorry. I don't know if you heard. Oh, I guess it was muted. I dropped my microphone there. I was stumbling around. Didn't need to tell you that. So, point being, these people are lying to you, and they know they're lying. And not even worse, they're directly contradicting this something they was said in the same context before, which shows you that it really comes down to whatever the narrative is, whatever the agenda is. They have nothing sacred. They don't have anything they care about. They'll lie. I mean, this kind of thing you'd say about a thief. They would steal. They would kill their mother for $5. Whatever the claim, that the statement is, I've heard before about. The point is, people are so shameless that nothing really matters. You will sell out things you claim you fight for in order to make a narrative point. Here's Josh Hawley, one of the worst. In Hong Kong, government police continue their assault on universities into the night, making mass arrests and now threatening live fire against largely defenseless students. Doesn't that sound exactly? Yes, it's the same damn thing. Beijing is pushing Hong Kong to a state of siege. Now, let's not forget, you can prove that there was still a presence, a CIA presence, a manipulation going on in Hong Kong. We proved to you that there were CIA elements that were there on camera speaking to a leader of this group. That doesn't change the point. It's always happening, and we shouldn't blindly believe that the protests are organic in any circumstance, even this. But I think the point is, unless you can prove they're not, you shouldn't blindly assume they are. My point is, in this case, you could see very clearly they were caught. Either way, it's because it was their agenda. They wanted to point at it because they wanted to use this against China. They were like, there, support them, and how dare you, free speech, and blah, blah, blah. But over here, it doesn't matter. And here's the worst part. Over here, you're talking about supporting Hong Kong. Over here, you're talking about supporting Americans. These are U.S. politicians that are supporting foreign entities when it matters and ignoring U.S. interests when it matters. That's what they care about, themselves. Oh, here's another example. So we're talking about Americans, right? And protesters in the United States using free speech. Talking, whether you agree with what they have to say or not, and the proof that we've gone over countless times of how constantly they're lied about, how constantly people are initiating violence and then pretending it's very clear they've been lied about left, right, and up. And we're going to show you an important clip about that, where Stefanik, who seems like this belligerent maniac around this topic, who seems to think she's going to gain something by lying about all this, was called out in the middle of Congress by the very person investigating this, that the claim she says didn't even happen. That's my point. But while that's going on, while they're going pro-Hamas, pro-rape to American students who don't even think that, GOP congressman offers a solution. Send them to Gaza. These are American politicians who are threatening, even if you want to pretend it's a joke or making a point, you're threatening to send Americans to Gaza, which is currently in the middle of a genocide, because they disagree with what you think they should think. This is the whole point about realizing the central concepts of what we call America, they don't care about, and maybe have never even been real in the minds of these people. That should be terrifying. Here's what Katie Halper writes. And as she writes, her name is now Katie Halper, is a Jew for ceasefire, right? And she says, please put clips of Zionist protesters committing violence and engaging in hate speech and police violence against pro-Palestine protesters below. Thank you. Twitter is so messed up, I'm telling you. But the point is, take a look. It's too much to go through all of it, but it's shocking. Here's a Zionist person that spits on a black child. I would argue that I don't know if they meant to spit on that one black child, but you can see where they get confronted down here. And she's like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. The point is that this is the kind of stuff that keeps happening, right? Or these people laughing at a sit-in protest where they're protesting for dead Palestinians, or getting into like the violent aspects where you can prove that they're the ones pretending, oh, you hit me with your flag. It's constant. And again, there's much worse examples as we've gone through, and there's ones that we're going to show you next, which are very important. But the point is, this thread goes on forever. And it's all about post-October 7th, Zionist aggression against peaceful protesters and Palestinians. Zachary Foster highlights, this is an author, his name is Nathan Thrall, has won the Pulitzer Prize for his book on the Israeli occupation, because that's what it is. But he has repeatedly had his events canceled in the US and Germany. He says it's rooted in the fear of being labeled anti-Semitic, which is exactly how that's supposed to work, for entirely legitimate criticism of Israel. As Zachary Foster writes, which, by the way, we just had an amazing interview with him again. That'll be the second one. I'm going to likely playing that tomorrow. He wrote, imagine if Pulitzer Prize winning author, which is very interesting to me that that's the case, because you can't pretend that's, some fringe, crazy racist when this is a Pulitzer Prize winning author for the work that they're calling racist. Imagine if a Pulitzer Prize winning author of a book about anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish pogroms had their event canceled. Everyone would be screaming anti-Semitism. But because the book is about Israeli occupation and apartheid, no one even blinks. It's double standards all over the place. And we know that. Most everyone in the world can now see it. Francesca Albanese makes an important point here. Laura Friedman writes, Knesset committee warned. U.S. campus riots, quote, direct threat to Israel. You're damn right they are, just not the way they're claiming. These are a direct threat to their control over the narrative. These protests are a direct threat to the U.S. and Israel's control over all sorts of foreign policy manipulations. They're a direct threat to their ongoing genocide. That's what they're scared of, is because once this goes away, especially Netanyahu, guys, this is over for them. Frankly, I think that's the case regardless, and that's not a unique opinion. But they say, quote, we cannot accept statements like, get this, Israel's an apartheid state, or Israel's an occupying state. Like, they're so desperate that they're falling back on the most provable examples of everything. And we're supposed to pretend that acknowledging provable international realities is racism? Well, yeah, that's their whole shtick, guys. You're a racist by pointing out that they killed that person right there because you hate Jews. No, I'm just pointing out that the IDF member shot a child, but you do you. It's just crazy. And everyone's falling. It's become obvious. Here's what she writes. UN Special Rapporteur says Israel does occupy the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. It does, and it does it brutally. It's a lockstep reality across anybody, any standing in the international community, and anybody with a brain that can clearly see that's the reality, and they've just lied about it. Like lies like Palestine never existed, or they're all terrorists somehow. It's ridiculous. And you get the ridiculous people like Laura Loomer that will push this stuff because they're ridiculous, because they are all about an agenda. She also writes, Israel does practice apartheid. It has two legal systems. Civil law for Israeli settlers illegally residing in occupied territories, which, by the way, nobody says is not illegal other than Israel, and martial law for the Palestinians. It has used for decades to forcibly displace Palestinians while taking their land and resources. Does the Israeli Knesset expect Western countries to curtail constitutionally guaranteed freedoms of expression and assembly or the right to protest so as not to scrutinize Israel's international wrongdoings? And how about the point that we know there are American Palestinians that live in Gaza? What about that, American government? You don't care about your own Americans, your American citizens being treated this way? Of course they don't, because they don't care now as they're being bombed to death, or Israel doesn't care about their own people that are currently there. And by the way, Americans are no more important than any other person that's being killed right there. It's simply to highlight the government of the United States, who at least pretends to care more about its American citizens, but does not clearly. But here's the point in all of that, guys. These are provable, obvious realities. Oh, and just before I show you that again, this is the point. Biden is so senile at this point and so completely lost that he says things that I think are gaffes all the time that most people don't pick up on. So SFMD points out, Biden was speaking with CNN, and he goes, I told Bibi, who's going to occupy Gaza after? Oops, right? I mean, help the government elect itself. It's just so stupid. The whole point is, we're not supposed to admit that it's occupied. That's the lie that they want you to think is a lie, right? It's not. It's obvious. It is occupied. It has been. All of Palestine, if you actually read all the UN documents, is because the truth is occupied. It's obvious. Gaza and the West Bank are the last remnants of what they claim are still Palestinian, even though they're manipulating all of these as well. They're occupied. But he's arguing, well, who's going to occupy it now? That's the whole point. As he writes, no one should occupy Gaza. The Palestinian people are not animals for everyone else to lord over. This is exactly the thinking that has gotten us to this point. Biden just clumsily said that because he's trying to act like he cares about the outcome, about the people. But the real point is, who is going to occupy it? How about if you want to pretend that they're supposed to be able to govern themselves, or there's supposed to be a self-determination concept, that you don't ask who is going to control their lives going forward. But that's always been the reality. And in case you needed to see it again, not that we should blindly trust any one entity, but how about we at least give credence to the idea that literally every meaningful human rights group on the planet has acknowledged that Israel is an apartheid state. And don't forget that just like South Africa, or just like any number of realities in the past, it was resisted to the death, to the teeth, to the nail, until it was forced. Don't forget, Israel was immersed in the South African apartheid conversation. That's why it was happening, in my opinion, as well as the ethnic weapons they were working on, which is not a secret, despite the fact, like so many truths, it's disregarded. The point is, it's obvious that this is the truth. And they will never admit that. In 2021, Human Rights Watch, a threshold crossed, Israeli authorities and the crimes of apartheid and persecution. Here's Amnesty International, Israel's apartheid against Palestinians, 2022. Here's B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights group. As they write, a regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This is apartheid. Here is Zachary Foster, who highlights, again, the point that we're making. Literally everybody with any standing in this conversation, and we're supposed to blindly trust the person pretending they're not apartheid and the governments that blindly support them, or rather the politicians. That's ignorance, guys. You're ignoring provable history and everybody they otherwise tell you to look to for this information. As he writes, every single one of these groups, I mean, you can look for yourself in the podcast. What's that? 14 of them? And it's the United Nations. Don Mena, all these groups that have a standing in this. Human Rights Watch. This one is Yesh Din. This is the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for West. I mean, you see the point. It's apartheid. It's apartheid. It's apartheid. 2010, 2017, 2020, 2021. Everybody acknowledges this. But here is, we live on planet Mars, the JNS. We cannot accept statements like Israel's an apartheid state. That's what we were just pointing to. So they just can't accept the provable reality. Now here, I think is important in regard to the resistance of all this. Because that's what we're actually watching here, guys. We're watching the resistance movement, whether they're wrong about everything else or whether they're being paid to be there. The point is that what is coming about, I think we've discussed the payment part, that it's actually completely baseless other than things that don't relate to what's happening now, but still might be, and we should consider that until you have more evidence. That's where we have to leave it. The reality that what we're seeing as a result of what's happening is powerful. It is resistance, and it's literally changing what they're able to do. It's literally driving politicians to change their narratives. Guys, that's real change, at least in the moment, and we have to try to use that. We have to try to lean into that. But here's what Censored Man shared this, and I'm not sure who this person was, but he just says, excellently put, and I agree. The idea that, we love to be a part of the resistance when it comes to our movies, but when finally comes time for a real resistance, guess where we ended up?
We do the next.
Watched the Hunger Games and you sided with the resistance. You watched Star Wars and you sided with the resistance. You watched The Matrix and you understood and sided with the resistance. You watched the movie Divergent and you sided with the resistance. You watched V for Vendetta and you cheered on the resistance. When it's fiction, you understand and you side with the resistance. Yet when it's happening to you in real life, right now, in the news, in the world, right now, you refuse to see it when it's the reality that you are living in. You're afraid to resist in real life. Blows my mind.
Truly. I mean, that's the sad reality about it. And realize that not every resistance act is violence, right? Even though there are actual, provable, legal acts of armed resistance when you're in occupied territory fighting against a military force. Legal acts of armed resistance per the Fort Geneva Convention. That's what we're talking about. Not that there weren't also crimes that were committed. I keep getting into this dynamic, which I find entertaining, because my interesting position on this when it comes to dealing with these Zionist bots and people that blindly buy their narratives online is that they always argue with what they think you're going to say. They argue with what the presentation is of what they think I am. Then pro-Hamas, hey, hate Jews, all these different narratives they spin, none of which are true. I mean, I've been very clear. I don't support them. How would I support a group that I'm not even sure is truly is fighting for only Palestine, as we know that they've been funded up until very recently, if not still, by Israel? That's a whole dynamic that makes me very clearly concerned about that. So I don't support anything that I feel like might be some kind of surreptitious idea. I support the act of armed resistance by literally anybody fighting for Palestine in the sense of doing so legally, and also the acts that were carried on October 7th. You can prove there were some crimes committed. That's reality. And that's what's funny is they go, you support Hamas and you hate Jews. It's like, no, you're wrong. You just assume into what you think is the reality. The point, though, is that you can clearly see that whether you support that group is that we're in the middle of a very real act of resistance, and that they have that right as well as any other resistance group, and that people just seem, gun shy with this, to use a bad analogy in this case, like just afraid to lean into what's really happening because, I mean, obviously, you're afraid you're going to get called an anti-Semite. You're afraid you're going to get, fired from your job. I get it. But now is the time. If there's ever been a time for you to stand up and do this, I would say the same thing with the COVID-19 conversation, but we're right back in this immediacy of people dying in real time. Now is the time to find some principled stance in all this and fight for these things. Now, and by the way, like I'm seeing an increasingly growing amount of people in the West, at the very least, who are Jewish, who are standing up in positions just like this, which is very uncomfortable, I imagine, for them. So here is Abir shares this. This is at the Pitzer College. A Jewish man stands up in this meeting and speaks out against what they're doing and says, I'm going to go stand with the Palestinian protesters, which I guarantee you, I mean, he probably lost some. I'll let it speak for herself.
2009, and I'm feeling very moved by what's happening just outside these doors. My grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. He was in concentration camps, and I grew up with stories of genocide and mass starvation, and I'm holding a lot of tension between being in this room right now and what's happening in here and what's happening just outside these doors. I've given to Pitzer pretty much every year since I graduated for 15 years, and I can no longer continue to do so. I'm gonna go join the students, and I pledge to not donate to Pitzer until it ends its complicity in the genocide and oppression of Palestinian people.
Good for him. I mean, that had to have been difficult, right? And what's interesting, though, is I really didn't see the expected pushback that I thought. You get those when you're in the crowd, like Clinton speaking on stage or whatever, and someone stands up and says, "You're a war criminal," even though they're right. Usually, you get the crowd that just goes, "Get out of here! Don't give us your good ideas about the reality of what's going on. We want to be lost." They push back. Weirdly enough, though, I feel like you sense a lot of like, he's saying the thing we're all thinking, right? I'm telling you guys, there is a dramatic shift happening, and it's important to recognize. Here's another example. This is a college student graduating in 2024 who makes a very important statement about what we should be thinking about, which I think a lot of people haven't considered.
I urge you all to acknowledge the class of 2024 of Gaza. That no longer exists. Students that will not be walking their stage this year, and 14,000 children who will never walk a stage ever again. Celebration without acknowledgement would be an injustice on behalf of my people. And to my fellow graduates, as many of us are future healthcare professionals, I urge you all to advocate and go against the grain when advocating for human life.
And hopefully when it comes to things like injections and medical manipulation as well, but we'll hope we get all of it.
I urge all schools, including UIC, to divest from companies complicit in constructing genocide.
Guys, this is why they're so terrified about this. You've got a massive Greenblatt in his clip about TikTok and what they're worried about. They see this. They've lost control. And the most clear example is in this generation. I mean, they're all talking about this. And again, whether you think they're misled or wrong, the point is irrelevant to what they're afraid of, which is that they are not controlling the perception of this generation, and that they're about to step into some positions. I mean, they're coming out of some Ivy League colleges here, and they're going to step into positions where they're going to have influence, and that will change the conversation. Because it's not like they're uninformed. Like, these people are speaking about occupation and apartheid. They understand the true reality of all of this, at least to some degree. And of course, all the misrepresentations of the occasional person they show on the outskirts of one of these protests who doesn't understand one thing or the other. It's ridiculous to pretend like that is the representation. Most of the people that I see talk to are very intricately aware of things that most of the average protesters against them or people on the news like Mr. Joe Scarborough can't even wrap their mind around. It's important to think about.
Let us be the generation that holds morality close to our actions and holds each other accountable in times like these. With hardships we face, there will always come ease. And as Obi-Wan Kenobi has stated, may the fourth be with you and all of your degrees. Congratulations to the class of 2024.
Here is a professor, Zinkas, who's spoken out about this already. He's a professor at Columbia University. He says, one of my students at Columbia just told me she was violently arrested by the NYPD for protesting, off campus, by the way, and had to go to the hospital. They slammed her head into a truck. She received multiple bruises and a concussion. The demonization of student protesters by President Biden and members of both parties, as well as the lockstep media, is giving permission to cops to wage a nationwide war on students, faculty, and any protesters who dare to speak up for the police and people of Palestine. Realize, don't forget, we showed you specifically the NYPD. They invited President Herzog into some inner NYPD meeting, and they have very clear influence over the outcome of actual enforcement. That's crazy. Or the 911 call centers with Carbine 911. Like, these are terrifying realities that a foreign country has control over. And the point being that we're talking about the training of different police forces. And I don't mean that as a ubiquitous concept, but the idea of the NYPD is shockingly obvious. And my point is that this is something that people are highlighting, that there's a problem right there, and that they're doing so off campus now in regard to people simply protesting. Like, okay, if the argument is they're supposed to be violating campus rules and regulations, why are they being arrested off campus for protesting for this? Now, that is happening, but in regard to what they claim happened, as he's saying that they slammed her in a truck and she got bruises, and who knows? The student could be lying about that. He could be lying. Who knows? Always consider that whatever side we're talking about, whatever you can't prove and verify should be up in the air. But the point is that we know that they are doing the off-campus part of this. We're showing this constantly. So we're in a really bad way where, well, frankly, I think we've been here forever. But my point is that I think the good part of it is that people are starting to see this who never saw it before, that the things you think are sacred, they don't care about and have never actually been there. And one last point on this, I don't want you to forget, because we've done a lot of focus on this. NY Plaid points out, and I think this came from Middle East Observer. It is this is an Israeli documentary, which you can watch. It's very clear, and it's important to see. Shows how Mossad spies, which is not even that secret of a conversation, dress up as sheiks and are sent to Syria and elsewhere. Why? To sow discord and spread hate and division. Right. As Mossad, as Israelis, as Jews? No. As pretending to be Muslims. And then people point at that and say, look at them screaming hatred against you. Now, that's not to say that there's not that happening. But my point is always the same, just like with these protests. If they have to make it up, if they have to dress up and pretend to be the hatred so they can point at it and say that's what they all think, then maybe it's not as serious or bad as real as they want to pretend it is. Nobody honest will ever pretend that the racism is not a real thing in whatever topic or whatever context. There's racism everywhere. People in every group, in every ethnicity, in every religion, there's going to be somebody who feels negatively about somebody just because of who they are. That's just the way of the world. Doesn't mean we should accept it. We should call it out, but it doesn't mean you should try to stop them or make it illegal for them to think that. That's just crazy madness. It should be more conversation, more spotlights, more highlights, so we can all go, yeah, you're gross, man. We all recognize you're disgusting. That's the way it should work. When they censor, it actually creates that, and that's the point of Zionism, in my opinion. But here it says, the famous Jewish journalist was dressed in disguise as the religious sheikh Abu Hamza. They gave him a Syrian passport, and he entered Syria incognito to collect information. How many Zionists are hiding under the cloak of Islam and planted in Muslim and Western countries to spread corruption and strife? Answer, he writes, tens of thousands. That's their opinion, but I flatly agree with that. Can't talk. But the other thing I'm asking is not just the bigger picture of what they're clearly, provably doing. And let's not forget the CIA and probably other groups in reverse are probably doing the same thing. But we can prove that this is a very important dynamic that's driving immediate real world casualties. Ask yourself how much of that's happening in these protests. More than we've already proven, by the way. As the Shirion.org group that openly said we're calling on all people to come in and act like you're Muslims, people that with Muslim sounding names that can fight for people. It was infiltration, and they were proudly displaying it. And then we watched it happen, and they got caught for it. This is part of what's going on. We can't forget that. Now, here's what Francesca Albanese also said in regard to claims of anti-Semitism. And then we're going to get into some of these false allegations about this and exactly what we were just highlighting. But here's what she had to say about the false allegations of anti-Semitism.
There's no other argument than accusing us of anti-Semitism so as to deflect the attention from what matters the most, from what our analysis insists upon. For decades now, I'm not surprised that Israel recurs to any strategies it can to uphold its goals to reach its objectives. But I'm surprised that the international community joins this action, because today you are not just attacked by Israel for being anti-Semitic. If you just ask for the application of international law to Israeli actions, it's many Western countries who do so, and they betray also what anti-Semitism has really been. Every time I get falsely accused of anti-Semitism, I respond. I don't stay quiet. I don't get intimidated. I become louder and louder. And by doing so, I think I also inspire other people to do the same.
Yep. 100%. You show them that there is another path other than, cowering to the accusations that aren't true. That's why I respect her so much, because she stood up in this and really clearly she's made a stance in a time when it's important to do so. And I think like she said, she's set a standard for people to follow. Because it's ridiculous. For someone who is calling out the crimes of a government, who's highlighting what's going on, and this is why this has become so flimsy. And I'll show you some of these examples, and especially when it comes to the example of the Eurovision we just saw. It's so self-evident that people are calling out people that support the genocidal state of Israel. Now, you can clearly argue that some of that might overlap with specific feelings about Jewish people. To argue that that is ridiculous, ignorant, and to accuse people of that, even if you don't know that, is just flat propaganda. But the point is that a lot of this conversation, for most of the honest people in this conversation, are acknowledging the very real reality of the crimes they're committing, and at the same time in my opinion, are not ignorant. I would say ignorant enough to not see the manipulation between Zionism and Judaism. And they very clearly recognize that and would never be as broad enough to say all Jews are one thing. And nonetheless, they call her anti-Semitic for doing so. So they've lost control of that. Here is one of the points of the lies. Michael Tracy, who's a Jew himself, says Elise Stefanik. You remember, we called her out in the beginning for she's the one that really started to drive the claims of these protests. Like, there was clips of her, like, her hands are shaking, and she's like, and she was calling out remember the president of Harvard and everywhere else, and she got blind following from a lot of the right-wing, high-level pundits who were just, again, completely okay with censoring speech as long as the speech they don't like, showing you that they're just as ridiculous as the woke mob, just as ridiculous. And she came out doing the same thing, accusing them of how, saying that what they were doing was hatred for Jews, even though it's clearly not, even though we can now see that in some cases, the majority are Jewish people that are put on by Jewish organizations. But these people don't care, or they're just that stupid, which is terrifying because they are powerful. They're not leaders, but they definitely have some power. But he writes, Elise Stefanik, who appears to have devoted her entire career to fueling anti-Semitism hysteria, claims that students marched through a Brooklyn high school chanting "Kill the Jews." New York City chancellor says after exhaustive investigation, there's no evidence of that. Doesn't stop her though, right? Because she's got a very clear agenda. I wonder who's driving that.
I want to switch to Origins High School. In October, 40 to 50 students marched through Origins High School chanting "Death to Israel" and "Kill the Jews." In addition,
don't you love? Okay, so first of all, just to point out, she's not saying this is a report. She's not saying this is what was told to me. She's saying this happened. Even that, see, like in the context of all this, you have to realize this is very aggressive. In any normal setting, there would be like, here's a New York Times report that says X, Y, and Z. She's just going, this is what happened. And she's wrong, by the way. It didn't happen. What's driving that? Is it AIPAC money? That could be. Is it something else? I don't know. But I find it interesting. These people like Biden and the rest are destroying their careers and maybe the flimsy thread of any kind of respectability they might have had. Just all out for the Zionist agenda. Doesn't make sense to me. It really doesn't.
An independent investigation found that a teacher who teaches global history was told by a student, quote, "I wish you were killed." Another student called her, quote, "a dirty Jew." And the student said he wished Hitler could have hit more Jews, including her. What disciplinary actions have been taken against those students who chanted "Death to Israel" at Origins High School and against the student who harassed with anti-Semitic slurs that teacher?
Well, first, the student, the individual student who said things, well, there's ways to go about that don't involve legal processes. He's in a school, hold him accountable for it. But see, Stefanik wants you to step over that process and arrest him because he said things that I don't like. Well, yeah, those are gross statements if they're actually what he said, which who knows? If for all we know, he said "Free Palestine," and that's how it gets framed. That's how ridiculous this is. Either way, it's an individual student in an individual class saying something as a teacher. Suspend him then. Or it's just crazy, the kind of things that they're trying to fold into some larger international lie that's just simply not true. Here's how he responds.
First of all, when we have done our investigation, we have found no evidence that there was any movement through the hall saying "death to the Jews. We looked at, and I treat that very, very seriously. That was reported in the papers. We have found no evidence that that actually happened.
Oh, surprise, surprise. Yeah, but does that change anything? No, because they reported it and she blindly follows it because that works for her narrative. These are the kind of cartoon cutout repeaters that we have in positions of power in this country. And what do you think that drives? That drives, in some cases, Jews to genuinely think they're at threat by average people in the street, which isn't true in most cases. And it also drives people to actually hate Jewish people under the guise, the manipulation that this is being driven by some kind of an only Jewish state. The reality is it's a Zionist manipulation that a lot of Jews in the world are beginning to see. It's people like Stefanik who are desperate for their own complete benefit to push something that has no bearing in reality, no rooting in reality. And she's going to keep going. She is clearly, as he says, devoted her career to fueling hysteria. Is that what we want in supposed leaders? They're not leaders by any stretch of the imagination. Well, here's what Arsen Ostrovsky said, a supposed human rights lawyer, which I'm starting to question if that's even real. He says the Kifo has become today's version of the KKK hood. No, this isn't the Babylon Bee. That's a real statement, guys. I just can't even believe we're in a point where that's the kind of thing that this is a real statement made by a real representative of Israel. A proud Zionist, he says. How do we make sense of that? Because it's shockingly ridiculous. So anybody anywhere wearing that as a KKK hood? Or how do you even make that translation, since we're talking about a white supremacist group and a group that you're calling Muslims and dangerous and Islam? And it's just ridiculous. It's like vanilla ISIS. It's clumsy, and it just goes, well, let's just mash them together. Let's see what they say. It's stupid. It is lowbrow manipulation. You just hope people go, gasp, racism. I'm terrified of that. I'm going to look away. I'm going to go with what you said, Arsen. Well, here's what I said. Are you calling all these Holocaust survivors and Jews either alongside them or wearing a key for themselves, equivalent to the KKK? Remember, he's in this video wearing right there. He's wearing one. He's a Holocaust survivor. So as I said very clearly, as I called him out after that, I thought it was in this one. Oh, I guess not. Or maybe it was under this. Oh, I know what it was. It was in the one that I shared here. Hold on. When I quoted him, I put it out this way too. There it is. So underneath that, I simply said, I usually do that, right? I comment so people following him can see it, and then I share it out to my thread so people can see what I had to say there. And I simply said, I tagged him, and I said, would you like to add something? Or are you happy to let this implication stand? Which then clearly implies that you do not care about Jews or racism at all, but instead only about defending Zionism and its open bigotry and hatred by hiding behind this lie. Of course, he hasn't responded. I mean, how can you possibly pretend that's the case when you have Holocaust survivors and Jewish organizations and Jews themselves sitting in solidarity, eating together? Like, don't remember this one? You have Jewish organizations and Jews along Muslims sitting there eating, like they're celebrating a Jewish holiday along the Palestinian supporters. And this is supposed to be aggressive Jew hatred that they're all terrified by. I mean, it's literally stupid, guys. It's like the most provable lie I've ever seen in this conversation. And these people are saying these are the new KKK members. Aviva Klampus points out, this monument in Copenhagen commemorates Denmark's rescue of the Jews during the Holocaust. It's been vandalized by people who believe that 6 million dead Jews wasn't enough. Okay, let's break this down. First of all, we don't know what actually happened here. We've already seen many examples, which I've shown you recently, where in Canada and the United States, where these people are caught pretending these things. Example was a Jewish store owner who defaced his own store and then said this was a hate crime, and he got caught lying about it. In no way am I saying that means it never happens or that's not possible. I'm just simply arguing we can't just blindly assume that it's the thing that it looks like, because that's very naive to do. On top of that, so does Aviva Klampus know who vandalized it? Does she know who did this? Because then how could you know that they believe something? That's pretty dumb. The point is they just say what they want you to think, and a lot of blind followers go along with it, but that's an increasingly small number right now. But let's go past that. So let's pretend you somehow know what they believe. You know what the people who did it, first of all, and what they believe, and that they then believe that that many Jews wasn't enough. So you know their intentions beyond their beliefs? Yeah, that's called stupid. That's called what, I mean, you could call it 1,000 different things. That's what the corporate media does every day. We know what Putin wants. We know what the Chinese are thinking because you guys are children that are following those people, that you believe those people. And I don't believe a lot do. Quite frankly, I think it's an increasingly smaller number of people that blindly fall into those traps. How can we not recognize that can't possibly know what that person thought or feels or believes? That's ridiculous. My point was, of course, it's possible this was committed by one protesting Israel. Of course it is. But with all the many, many times just since October 7th that this has been exposed as complete fabrications by Zionists or pro-Israeli protesters, we need to ask if this was the same. And then I highlight the very thing we just talked about, where Stefanik is lying and gets caught lying about what they claim happened or what the news said happened, which wasn't actually true. My point on this guy, the way is, look, I personally don't think that a Palestinian would do this because that seems disrespectful to what they're wearing that for. But overall, like, what is this supposed to say? I believe they tried to write Free Palestine. I just don't think this makes any sense for what people, but it certainly could be. Certainly could be. But we already know as a matter of fact that they've been caught lying about things like this repeatedly, caught defacing buildings. And I'm talking about improvable examples, Zionists or Jewish people themselves who have made these allegations and are caught. Canada just caught one. Police just called one out in regard to what happened in the protest. We've seen 45 examples of them pretending to get hit. They stabbed me in the eye, but you seemingly have no blemish. Or the fact that they claim that they're being trapped or I'm being aggressively stalked and they're the ones walking. It's infuriating. If you have to lie about these things, it's probably not as serious as you're claiming, which is in no way to suggest it's not happening in some case. But here's what Jonathan Cook points out, another example of this manipulation. Rosmans points out, a reminder that if you hear cheers for Israel during the broadcast of the Eurovision conversation, it's actually because EBU is using anti-booing techniques, trying to cover up boos with fake cheers for TV. Which is actually pretty crazy. It says, but this is how it's actually like inside the arena. So the point is, if you watch the real version, which you can look up, it's interesting that you can't hear any of the boos. Do you want to hear what it actually sounded like? But it's the truth, because even people like Elon Levy are now making a big stink about how they're only doing this because she's Jewish. Because again, you know what 400,000 people feel and think? Yeah, you're real smart, Elon. I mean, you can very clearly hear that there's a predominant boo going on. There's some cheering happening too, but it's very clear that they're booing over the top. Now, you guys can think what you want about it. I mean, personally, I think there's a level of decorum. Because the person's there on behalf of Israel, but who knows what they really think personally. I would argue that you could probably assume they support Israel, but I don't know for sure. So I probably wouldn't have booed the individual. But either way, you know why people are doing this, guys. They do not want to support somebody who is supporting Israel. You could argue that means something about Jewish people, but you're the one literally saying it's the state of the Jews alone. So wouldn't that be a fair argument anyway? But my point is that it's not actually what most of them think. And I only say fair argument because that's what you frame it as, even though it's not actually true. So it's just this funny, ridiculous circle of nonsensical logic where you make that claim. And then if I highlight that claim, I'm somehow racist. Like, that seems really dumb. Like a lot of this stuff. But most of these people, in my opinion, are simply booing because they want the world to see that we don't support Israel. Many of them, in many of these contexts, like I don't know them in this point here, but in the points we've proven, like these protests, many of them are Jewish. So they're booing Israel or they're calling out Israel and they're Jewish. So you can't be broad stroking any criticism as anti-Semitic or hatred for Jews. But again, I just don't need to stress this because I think most people see it right now. This is funny. This is people, you suck. But the point, as he says, could there be a starker image of Western elites manufacturing of reality for us? Popular anger at Israel's inclusion at Eurovision, which, by the way, that's another point I forgot. That's been there long before October 7th. Why in the world is a Middle East country involved in Eurovision? Because they're desperate to make you think it's part of Europe. They kind of gave up on that lie a long time ago. They wanted you to think they're somehow in the middle of this, but they're part of Europe. They're not actually Middle East. But that doesn't work if they're trying to act like they're surrounded by enemies in the Middle East. The point is, it's not part of Europe. They just do it because it's about propaganda purposes, guys. That's what this is always about, increasing the way you view them. But so the point is, the anger at them for even being involved is pretty prominent long before this, but it's expressed as booing at the event, airbrushed out by the media, replaced by politically more convenient cheering, which is a lie, but they did it anyway. Here's what Elon Levy had to say about it. Tonight, a brave young Jewish woman. Why is she brave exactly? Because she went on stage? What about the other people who weren't Jewish? Are they brave too? Or is she just default brave because she's Jewish? It's like they can't realize that we can see these just flimsy narratives they push out, right? I mean, she's a woman who went out on stage, so she's no more brave than anybody else that's there. His argument is she's brave because everybody hates Jews. That's what his argument is. He says she will be bullied by crowds of anti-Semites who either supported a massacre of Jews at a music festival or think the follow-up should be a boycott of the country. Again, so every single person there either hates Jewish people, supports their death at a festival, or boycotts the right of you to. It's just ridiculous, flimsy, broad stroke, lowest common denominator BS. That's why he's bad at this job. But my point is, before I could even tweet this out, I already saw him saying this. It's because they hate Jews. No, it's probably because they're protesting Israel. But either way, neither of us know the reality of that, Elon. But here's what he pushes even further. Here's a Greek representative, Greek singer at Eurovision, who apparently pretended to be sleeping while they were singing. God forbid. But of course, here's what he says about it. Pathetic, childish, bigoted behavior. Or she just didn't enjoy the performance. Or she hates Israel or Jewish people. I don't know. Neither do you, you complete moron. But here's what Mia said. This is great Greece representative singer and an embarrassment for Greece. For every decent Greek person, despite the fact that like the vast majority of everybody there was acting the same, but let's pick her out. Pretending to fall asleep while Israel's contestant is speaking is not just bad education or pure Jew hatred, but also a stain over the Greek nation she represents. My God. Jew hatred. That's the point I'm making. It's just lazy. It is lazy, and it's creating the very thing that they think they're trying to say. It's embarrassing. They don't care. Same point. This person says, we're told the pro-Palestinian protests are entirely peaceful. Well, you can prove that, by the way. It's not whether we're told or not. It's self-evident. If you just don't blindly follow narratives and ignore all the evidence you can see. It says, if Eden Golan opted to walk to Eurovision final rather than be escorted in a dozen vehicle armed convoy with helicopter support, that's not a joke, what do people think would happen? This is the same as pretending because they had to cover the monument in the other protest that meant that the monument would have been attacked. You can't do something under the guise that you think a problem's there and not prove that problem and then point to your actions as proof of the problem. This is the kind of illogical propaganda manipulation that a child could see through. So it is peaceful. That's an obvious reality. My point is they're saying if she decided to just walk there with all this protective support, and the point is they point at that protective duty as evidence that she would be attacked. It's one does not equal the other. You guys are doing this either because you blindly buy the lie that she's in danger, or you do it to make the lie look real. In any case, it's not what's happening. But look at all the comments down below. Or actually, more importantly, look at what he said. Elon Levy responds, they would peacefully lynch her. Lynch her. So we're back in Jim Crow now. We're just going to lynch people because the idea that this is what you can see historically has happened to Palestinians at Zionist hands right up until very recently. In fact, what we can see going on in Gaza right now is an interesting statement. What he's saying is all you Europeans and Americans and everybody else, you're all racist, anti-Jew hating maniacs, and we're defending her from you. That's what he's doing. They would just peacefully lynch her because the vast majority of people in the world are supporting what they're fighting for. None of them want to lynch anybody. As they say, every accusation is an admission. Here's what Belgian TV did during this Eurovision. They actually broke through, good for them, with a statement that said, to address Israel's genocide, it said, this is a union action. We condemn the human rights violations committed by Israel. Additionally, Israel is destroying press freedom. This is why they are pausing the broadcast for a moment. Good for them. Of course, what do you think it got framed as? Can you guess? Can you take a guess, a shot in the dark, ladies and gentlemen, what they called that? racism and Jew hatred. Of course they did, despite the fact that they very clearly highlighted the fact that it's about the crimes of Israel. But you're not allowed to do that. You can't acknowledge crimes of Israel because you must be a racist. Pretty stupid. But you want to see what a real racist looks like? And I'm really glad this is actually happening. It's starting to show that there is some kind of turn happening here. We showed you this clip. Remember this? Where this guy was like aggressively going after this Muslim woman for no reason. Where she's like, leave me alone, leave me alone. He's like, I'm not, like in a very childish way. Like, I'm not even touching you. Like just getting up in her face and screaming racist things at her. Both. Look at this, guys. Look at how threatening that is. You know who this guy is? He's a teacher. So as we're sitting here talking about all the ridiculous narratives about how we should never let these teachers teach these kids in regard to the protests. Why? Because you get overwhelmed with a bunch of Republican talking points about how they're all woke, indoctrinated mindset, which, by the way, most of them probably are lost to some degree or entirely in the woke ideology. I'm not going to dispute that, but that doesn't influence, it doesn't have to influence the reality of what they're fighting for, which is their free speech, their right to protest, and the fact that we can all see a genocide, which most conservatives, I argue, can see as well. But what do you think this looks like? There's no misunderstanding this. His name is Yudulman is out, or it says Yudulman is out. Per ASU President Michael Crow, quote, he is no longer permitted to be on the campus and he will never teach here again. End of story. That's what happens when you are an open, bigoted, disgusting racist who's screaming racist things at a person for no reason because you have Zionist beliefs. Or because you believe you're justified because they're all bad and you're the right one. Like, these are gross people, guys. This is the true thing that they claim we're fighting when they talk, this is the reality of what they claim they're fighting when it comes to the U.S. government and everybody else. In fact, this is what they're creating. That's the inversion as usual. But ASU has said on Monday that he was on leave pending an investigation. It's important. Glenn Greenwald shared that. Now, here's something I want to include before we go to the next segment I think is important. Talking about lies and manipulations. Check this new video out, guys. And I'll go into what the report is to show you, because, for all we know that there was a rocket that was fired that did hit here. I don't know. I think it's hard not to see this as let's put it this way. If they're reporting this happened and your only source is the IDF, just like we made the point in Ukraine with how many times they've been caught lying, and even worse than Ukraine, in fact, because the corporate media has now shifted into calling out these lies. I don't know why anybody, anywhere, and which is, by the way, why I kind of see this reported in most of the main platforms just yet. It's obvious that we shouldn't take them at face value. But watch this, and you tell me if this doesn't look like a ridiculous B movie.
We are here in Beersheba in the southern...
What was the point of that first clip at all? To make it seem like there was some kind of action going on? You lay down? It's like they don't even think this stuff
part of Israel. As you can see behind me, a missile exploded in the middle of the playground. This missile was part of a rocket barrage that was launched from Gaza. Fortunately, no children were here at the time.
Look, I'm not going to dispute the fact that rockets could be fired, but let's realize that you're literally talking about an ongoing murder campaign. Let's just say you're uncomfortable with the provable reality of what a genocide looks like. Are you going to pretend that there's not crimes taking place? Are you going to pretend that there's not obvious murder taking place? Open, ongoing, constant murder of massive groups of people? Come on. It's obvious that there's something wrong happening. And what we're going to do is point back to this incident here where nobody was hurt. Doesn't that seem a little bit obscene? Now, also on the reality that we're talking about, which they often point out, that most of these rockets, now there is a difference today. I don't know which one this was, but some of them don't, in fact, have guidance. So that's the claim they've always used, where they say because there knows guidance, that means it's indiscriminate bombing, so it's a war crime, which is not an unfair argument. But then when they want to, they go, they targeted this hospital. It's like, well, you just said they don't have targeted systems. So they just throw lies back and forth. That's what the Israeli government does. So for all I know, this was a completely fabricated reality. But at the same time, we know that there are rockets being fired, and we know that they're currently under constant murder, starvation, and open genocide. So it's kind of hard to see that they wouldn't try to fight back. But interestingly enough, it has been a very, there's been very few things that have been fired since like the first 3 months of this. Here's what the report says. A rare Hamas attack, and they point that out because it hasn't been anything after the first 3 months for the most part, hit Beersheba in Friday evening, injuring a woman. A total of 5 rockets were fired from Gaza, they claim. The Israeli Defense Forces said. That's my point right there. is if all we have is the Israeli Defense Forces, the Israeli occupation forces saying something, we have to question whether this is not even real, whether they did this themselves, who knows? That's not that far outside their own possibility, especially how we've already caught them blatantly manufacturing very important scenes of investigation. But it says one was intercepted by the Iron Dome, and another 4 hit open areas. So you're telling me there was a woman standing in an open area that just got hit and it injured her? Like that doesn't even seem consistent. But why, if it's an open area, why would there be a playground that was hit? Doesn't that seem inconsistent? I mean, these are things that we obviously point out all the time, but right now it seems much more relevant. A 37-year-old woman was taken to the hospital as she was lightly injured by shrapnel. Images from the city showed impact on a children's playground with some of the plastic installations mangled, which I didn't really see that much. I saw a spot on the ground, but it says Be'er Shiva, the largest Israeli city in the south on the verge of the Negev Desert, has not been targeted by rocket fire since December. It says basically the point is they stopped firing for the most part after the 3 months because they claim they ran out of munitions. So then why are they firing now? I don't know. It doesn't make, there's inconsistencies, I think. But it says recent launches targeted Israeli communities immediately across the border. So all I'm saying is that this is something at the very least that's pretty hard to focus on while you're watching. In the time it took me to report this, 15 children died in Gaza, right? So let's make sure we have our priorities straight, but at the same time, we need to question whether or not this is a legitimate reality. I think that's important. By the way, hold on. Sorry for hearing me redundant there. I keep forgetting to end the Telegram live stream, by the way, and it drives me crazy. So I hope you weren't watching that. I just ended it. But if you don't end it, apparently, if you end the stream and leave it open, you are unable to stop the stream until the next time you start a stream. I don't like Telegram. That's silly. Anyway, you didn't need to hear that. Here is the other, and that was the point in general. So we're talking about a rocket that they claim was fired, that they claim hit a playground, which of course becomes this big problem about, targeting children, even though, again, they argue it's indiscriminate or because there's no targeting systems and so on. But what did we just talk about? The lie about the Kareem Shalom crossing. And he did it again on May 8th. He pushed it out again, where he said, wake up, Hamas is trying to sabotage aid deliveries into Gaza, that they fired at the Kareem Shalom crossing. No, they did not. And it's a provable reality, according to reports from Israelis on the ground and according to reports from Israeli media. The soldiers were stationed on the border near the Kareem Shalom crossing to guard equipments of battalions preparing to invade Rafah. It's reported right on the surface, and he still lies about it. The point was these were groups not at the Kareem Shalom crossing, but near it, where they set up an installation to prepare their ongoing genocide of Rafah. And all they can do is go, they bombed the aid, even though they didn't. And here's what somebody on the ground said. It's a staging area outside Gaza where troops were preparing for the Rafah invasion, near the crossing. It's just so shocking how obvious it is to prove these lies. And they just keep doing it. So my point is, if they're lying about such an egregious reality that we can easily prove, we should wonder whether they just manufactured lies elsewhere, which we know that they do. And here is another lie in the same regard, where it's going all the way into today. Or Kogat, who we've proven 15 times over is a egregious liar. They make up lies about food aid and everything else that we've proven many times over, where they go, Hamas just fired the Kareem Shalom, the main humanitarian aid crossing. You know why they keep pushing this? For all I know, that didn't even happen. First of all, what we can prove is that they fired on a military installation where they were building for Rafah. Whether that continued after that, I mean, who knows? Because this is what they've done before. Even Haaretz has covered how they would lie about stuff like this for their own agendas to benefit themselves politically. The point is that it's possible they're lying about this entirely to manufacture the illusion that the reason aid stopped was because they were bombing the crossing. And I'm going to show you why I say that. Because aid, since like 4 or 5 days ago, has completely stopped. Not just slowed down, like utterly and completely stopped, while Elon still's going, we're bringing in more than ever. And so is Kogat. It says, this is the 4th time this week that they actively targeted this crossing. And Elon says the same thing. This should be the front page story, Harry News. What, that you wrote something on Twitter? Sorry, we like facts to report things, Elon. I know you don't. Now, we just covered this discussion, Israel's ceasefire long con and Rafah massacre, where we discussed the lie about the Kareem Shalom crossing, if you want to watch that. But let's realize that Israelis are sabotaging roads to block and prevent humanitarian aid from coming in. That's one part. I mean, literally doing this everywhere. celebrating, having raves and feasts in front of where people are starving by blocking the food, by dumping trucks in front of everybody, being cheered on by the Israeli government. But here is what Sam Rose from UNRWA is reporting. And don't forget, even their allies have now called them out for not producing any evidence that UNRWA was ever connected to Hamas or part of October 7th. They've repeated this publicly from the US government, from Canada. They just keep lying about it. But here's the point, though. No aid has come through.
Has come into Gaza now since Sunday. No aid, no fuel, no supplies, nothing. And we really are now down to our last reserves. We have a few more days of flour that we can provide, but everything else will start to shut down very, very soon without fuel, without nothing that we can do with any of these supplies. So the situation is really, really desperate as we wake up this morning.
That's the reality. They stopped, just like they did in the beginning, by the way. And in case you wanted that proven, which I hope you do, because even from me or anybody else, you should not blindly take these things at face value, even from UNRWA or anybody else. The point is you can see that they have done nothing. This is dropped off, right? This report is as of May 10th. This is an important page to follow. Look at this, full electricity blackout. I mean, this is what they're doing. Zero fuel, zero everything. They've now dropped it down to nothing. Interestingly, just like they did in the first couple of weeks. Now, these are weeks over here, right? 7th to the 12th, 13th to the 19th. It's the longest 2 weeks of zero aid while they were getting 500 trucks, including fuel, before that. And you can clearly see that they came nowhere close. These are the daily averages per week. 11, 43, 59. I mean, that's creating starvation, guys. Anything under 500 was going to create more starvation because even at 500, they were in their food insecure. It was reported by everybody up to October 7th. And you can see the numbers in the podcast don't even get over 200 until barely until into April. And then they shoot up to 340 for one day, and still that's less than 500. So still it's not going to help these people in the way that it needs to. You're going to help. In some cases, you're going to get some food to some people. But if we're, as they've now said, in full-blown famine, direct quote, in the north, they need 1,000 trucks a day. They need saline, or rather, whatever it is, sustenance. They need IVs and more to pull them out of this. That's not my opinion. That's a mental assessment of people involved. And what do? They go to zero. There's just no way to misunderstand this, guys. They are stepping this up, and people are going to start to starve to death immediately. They already are. How much you want to bet Elon Levy makes an argument that they've been bringing in more aid and the UN won't do anything to help? As they're over here going, we're here and no one's bringing it in. Like, it's just disgusting. Maybe the reason they fired Elon is to remove that kind of overlap to where, hey, he's not our guy anymore, so he can just lie. I mean, he already was. But either way, that's what it seems to be his role. It's rough. Now, Elise Stefanik, in another ridiculous propaganda way, came out to go after Joe Biden, interestingly enough, which also continues to show you their inner dynamic of the left-right paradigm, because they're all actively fighting for their own power inside the U.S. government as they all line up in the same direction. Right, here's her $592,000 loan, bribe coming from AIPAC to Stefanik. I wonder if that influences her actions. What do you think? Especially knowing that they would yank that the moment she didn't do what she was told. That's what we keep seeing. Well, here's what she says. Last night, and she posted this on the 9th, Joe Biden doubled down on his plan to undermine Israel by withholding the munitions needed to target Hamas and avoid civilian casualties. Let me get this straight. Did you actually just write that you doubled down on his plan to withhold munitions that they need to avoid civilian casualties? That's what the sentence reads. So how exactly do you need munitions to avoid casualties? Like, this is her clumsy, ignorant writing. This is just because I think they're bullet points she's trying to include. Oh, and they're avoiding casualties, but you do it in a way that makes you look like you don't even know what you're talking about. So the munitions they would have had would have helped them not kill civilians? That's the stupidest thing in the world. I guess you could try to argue that they were giving them more precise munitions, but that's not even true. The ones they're withholding in this conversation are the 2,000-pound dumb bombs, the ones that are not precision. And that's provable. So again, just ridiculous. You are a ridiculous cartoon of a person who is blindly working in efforts against your own country. It's crazy to me. Her point, though, is that in defiance of Congress, Biden's decision greenlights Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran to escalate attacks. No, it doesn't. That's just your Zionist talking point about how all these groups are going to rise up and overthrow the world. Oh, you mean like the Azov movement you support is going to do, or that Israel openly says they're going to do with the Greater Reset Project or Greater Israel Project? Yes. There is no indication that Hezbollah or Iran in general or any of them have designs to go after everybody the moment that what? Israel's not in their way? I mean, let's be honest about that. That's not what's happening. They're not, but Israel is clearly not in any position to stop any of them from doing anything, especially without the support of the United States. So it's just this clumsy overlap to make you think whatever. And this will be parroted by all the right-wing screamers. Just like anything the left, the same way. The left-right paradigm, guys, they don't know, just like Joe Scarborough, they don't know what they're talking about. Here's the point. The U.S. withheld a bomb shipment to Israel out of fears it could be used in Rafah. That's what they said anyway. Meanwhile, they've allowed a lot of other things to continue. And as I said on a recent show, let's not forget, there is 1,000 ways that they could send weapons through other entities, through other channels, or directly through their own with doing so secretly. These people are not honest. By stopping a single shipment it's a ploy. It is a placation, guys. They still support this, as Matt Miller will happily tell you. Oh, it's just a limited action, not a real full action. Oh, so let me explain for me the difference. I just saw 400 children die today. Is limited? Okay, got it. So it's okay as long as they kill under 500. Okay, like that's the kind of BS they're playing, and it should make you sick. They're literally endorsing genocide by acting like if it was a little bit more than that, then we would be okay with it. And they're still supporting them. They're still giving them everything. They still have generals on the ground, as Axios reported. They've got people on the ground, as they still try to lie about. Now, here is the actual report that we've shown you before. This is a New York Times investigation that Haaretz is citing. Israel used the most destructive bombs, and these were the 2,000-pound dumb bombs we've talked about, on the areas designated as safe. Now, how do you reconcile that statement with what she's talking about over here? So they need those to avoid killing the people that they aimed at? People that are fighting for a foreign entity at the expense of Americans. Now, here is another one of those ridiculous clowns. And here's what he said in Congress. Now, this was shared by a Hebrew channel in general. But what he says, Lindsey Graham, yeah, it's just, I'm going to stop it a few times. It's kind of shocking. And all he's doing, his only job right here, is to act like he's some grandstanding and outraged, morally outraged about how you stop the shipments. And after that, we'll go through all of the disgusting things that are happening because of those weapon shipments that he's trying to maintain.
Confirm that that we're delaying transfer or stopping transfer of certain weapons like 2,000-pound bombs.
Nope, just one shipment though. And so that's the thing. They're important. They want, even people like him want you to think that they're just stopping all of them. That's not the truth. If you read the report, which I know they did and don't care about, it's not stopping all of them. That's not what's happening.
To Israel, is that correct?
Israel.
What I said,
Israel.
we're assessing where we are right now.
Well, there are media reports that has happened. Are they incorrect?
Don't you love that? So again, recognize that these supposed people in the know are just being led by other people like the New York Times, who literally just got caught faking an entire story about rape and called out by their own people, who it's continuing to just check out this is a squirrel because it is continuing to just fall apart in real time. So he goes, this is happening. And then he goes, well, no, we're just assessing. And so is that wrong then? Why didn't you start with that? Why didn't you ask him, is this a real story? Why don't you tell me? Because you're there. Because it's about propaganda. It's about setting narratives for people who are watching. And the idea is they stop one of these shipments because the world can see what's going on. And his outrage about that is clear. But what, off the top of my head, I'm blanking all of a sudden on the military entity sitting there. God, forget his name. But the point is that he's saying that, no, we're just assessing, which probably is a lie, but I don't think they stopped anything, to be quite honest. But the reality is what he's saying is we're trying to assess whether or not they are. Now, how can you be upset about that? Wouldn't the argument be, oh, good, I'm glad we're making sure that they're not violating the law? No, Lindsey Graham is outraged by that. You're not allowed to do that. We need to help them even if they are breaking the law, which is the undeniable sentiment of what he's saying.
That we have made a decision to Again, we've made no decisions.
Okay.
We're assessing.
Are you worried that if you make a decision to deny weapons that Israel say they need, that it would send a signal to Hamas and Iran to keep pushing?
Same old BS response. Now, recognize that that's not what's happening. Israel has already come out and said, we don't need your weapons. We're going to invade Rafah either way, which I guarantee he knows. It's about framing the narrative as you're letting your partner just, stranded with nothing to defend themselves, and we have to fight for the Jewish state. That's not what's happening. They're like, we don't even need you, U.S. We've got plenty. So, and I'll show you that next. Actually, let me see if I think it's right here in the actual next. Well, let me just show you this. I'll just show you this now and come back to it. Here is what we've shown here before. Especially belligerent, childish representative of Israel. She's the one that went up there and was openly saying about how they're going to kill people and how the people in the Knesset who are not Jewish are not welcome there and that you should cry somewhere else. Like, it's just, they're gross, man. And she says, her name is Tali Gottlieb, the U.S. is threatening not to give us precise missiles. And by the way, again, there's clear narrative management going on here. You can easily prove, as even Lindsey Graham just said, we're talking about the 2,000-pound dumb bombs. But she goes, oh, yeah? It's just so funny. She's so childish. Well, I got news for the U.S. We have imprecise missiles. I'll use it. I'll just collapse tents in Gaza, 10 buildings. I'll do it. That is what a grown woman said in front of a political group. Oh, yeah? We'll just use bad things on hurt people. How do you think about that? That's what she's doing. We should all laugh at people like this. She shouldn't be in control of anything. She shouldn't be in control. I mean, I can make all kinds of jokes, but the point is they should not be in power. So when we're talking about Lindsey Graham, who's trying to say that they need our weapons, and if we don't, we're going to leave them high and dry, it's not even what's really happening. But on top of that, his argument, back to the clip, isn't that going to send a message to the people we pretend are terrorists to just hit our... What does that even mean? They use that same go-to every single time. If we don't do what I claim we're supposed to, don't you think that gives a message to the Russians that we're weak and they're going to invade everything? It's not the reality. It's always a possibility. It's simply just not the verifiable reality. It's not what's actually happening, in my opinion, assessment based on all the facts on the table. The Iranians are not interested, in my opinion, in invading every country the moment that Lindsey Graham looks the other direction. Neither are the Houthis. Most of these groups are fighting for resistance movements against oppression. Now, I argue, as always, any of these governments would rise to the position of the U.S. if given enough time and enough overwhelming power and influence. That's just what I think government can ultimately become. But what we're staring at now is him trying to frame the people fighting against their genocide as the ones that will do the thing they're doing, should they not arm the one carrying out the genocide.
Senator, we want to make sure that we're providing the right kinds of weaponry.
Okay.
Lloyd Austin, excuse me. I couldn't remember his name for a minute. That's who he is. I saw his name tag, so I didn't remember.
Would you have supported dropping the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, General Brown, in World War II?
Oh, my God, this is crazy.
Well, Senator, I think just based on the situation where
Well, we know. I mean, it's happened. We know. I'm not asking. They did it. Do you think that was disproportionate?
This is so fascinating to me. Do you know what's happening right here, in my opinion? Look, it's a pretty it's actually an interesting thing. The conversation about dropping those bombs, we're supposed to pretend like that was justified. We're supposed to pretend as Americans that that was somehow the right thing to do, even though we all know it wasn't. And everybody anywhere with a brain integrity and the briefest understanding of history knows that they were already pulling back in most every position, and they decided to do it anyway, to threaten Russia and to see what happened. You can literally find statements by this from the people that were there at the time. The point is, it was not about the necessity of fighting off the evil of the world. It's just not what happened. And so what he's doing right now, which I know Lindsey Graham I can't speak to what I believe he's aware of that clear reality. If not, that's just as terrifying because he doesn't even know basic realities of history, but who knows? But he's putting it to them because I think the secret understanding is we're all supposed to pretend that's the right thing, even though he knows they probably don't want to say that out loud because average Americans are going to be like, what? You agree with being the only country to ever use a nuclear bomb on a bunch of civilians? Like, that's crazy. But he's doing it for a tactical reason. He's trying to get them to kind of either not say no or say yes, so we can turn around and go, that's why we need to give the big bombs to Israel. So is your analogy that Israel's going to bomb a bunch of civilians with the bombs and that should be okay because they're all bad guys? We're not fit children. We're not stuck in a time where we didn't have the understanding of the history or the internet. Lindsey Graham doesn't wrap his mind around that, or he is so desperately compromised that it doesn't matter.
It was definitely.
Well, what do you in hindsight?
You see, I don't think he wanted the answer. It's a hard question because the answer is no. We shouldn't have done it.
Do you think that was the right decision for America to drop 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities in question?
Well, I'll tell you, it stopped the World War.
Okay.
No, it didn't. You see, and that's the cop out. That's the sidestep. No, it did not. The war was ending, and you can find 1,000 examples of how they already knew this, and they bombed it anyway.
Okay, well, so we had do you agree, General Austin? If you'd been around, would you say drop them?
God, this guy is such a belligerent war maniac. I just can't get past how gross this person is.
I agree with the chairman here.
I mean, if we go back in time, says, hey, we got 2 atomic bombs, should we drop them? What would you say?
Well, I think the leadership was interested in curtailing the.
Well, what's Israel interested in?
See?
Do you believe Iran really wants to kill all the Jews if they could?
How are you even connecting these conversations? So your argument is we should use a nuclear bomb, or we should allow them to have one, or at least a big munition because Iran wants to kill all the Jews, which isn't even true? I mean, it's shockingly stupid. It's shockingly alarming. These people have actual power, and this should terrify us. And then you got screaming Republicans in the two-party illusion that broadly and blindly support people like this. Now, I do agree that a lot of the conservatives are seeing through people like this, but sometimes they just call them rhinos and don't realize that it's a two-party illusion. In any case, though, these are people that we should be scared about. They're driving things that are in the action, they're counter to interests of Americans under the guise that they're in your interest. And what he's talking about now is the lie that they want to kill all the Jews, despite the fact that they're very clearly, just like even Hamas, their updated charter, they're going after Zionism. They recognize the difference between the people of the country and the government, just like they very clearly say about the United States. That when they burn the flag they're talking about the government and the oppressive actions of that government, which most Americans are becoming aware of right now. And so all he's trying to do is create the blind acceptance that because the Jews are at threat, which by the way, there are Jews all over the world, not just in Israel, somehow that's the only thing we want to point at, that we have to give them the bombs that they're using to murder children. And that's supposed to be the rules-based international order.
The Iranian regime, yeah. Do you believe Hamas is serious when they say we'll keep doing it over and over again?
That has been a leader, in quotes, in Qatar, who they clearly protect, and by the way, Israel funds Hamas, who is saying the thing that they want to point at. I have not seen the Hamas resistance in Gaza say that. I have not seen people on the ground say, we're going to keep doing. What I have seen is we'll continue to resist. We'll continue to fight against oppression until we get our self-determination. And of course, they just go, that means kill all the Jews. And it's as easy as ever for someone like him to lie about that.
Do you agree that they will if they can?
And how do you even know that that's what they think? This is a game.
I do. Hamas,
okay. Right. Do you believe that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization also bent on the destruction of the Jewish state?
Why don't you just write down what you want us to think, Lindsey Graham, and just pin it to and just cover the screen with it and say, this is what we're going to know. Like this is not anything other than you setting your narrative about the lies of all of this. Hezbollah is a resistance group that was grown organically in this country that is fighting against right now they are currently fighting against the occupation that Israel has of their territory. So again, it is a legal act of armed resistance, and all they want to do is call it all terrorism. Or how about the Sudan, who you wanted to call terrorism until they decided to normalize with Israel and nothing changed, and all of a sudden they're no longer terrorists. So you don't need to look any further than to realize the name terrorist only means against our interests in the eyes of both of these countries.
Hezbollah is a terrorist organization.
Okay, so Israel's been hit in the last few weeks by Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas.
But what you forgot to include is that they've been bombing, occupying, and murdering people in those countries for a very long time. But when they finally responded, which is a legal act of armed resistance, Lindsey Graham uses that to argue they're all terrorists. So we should bomb their civilians too with nuclear bombs.
Dedicated to their destruction. And you're telling me you're going to tell them how to fight the war?
It's not what he said, Lindsey Graham. And here becomes the fake outrage. What they said is we're evaluating shipments because they're potentially used to kill civilians.
And what they can and can't use when...
So it's your munitions that you're giving them, and you're complaining that you're telling them what they can and can't use? No, you're not using U.S. tax dollars to fund what they're doing with those munitions. But he doesn't care about that. He wants you as an American to spend your tax dollars that you worked for, that they steal in every other way, to fund a foreign country's genocide. And he's outraged about the fact that you don't want that.
Everybody around them wants to kill all the Jews.
Nope.
And you're telling me that if we withhold weapons in this fight, the existential fight for the life of the Jewish state, it won't send the wrong signal?
None of them even said that, by the way. He answered his own question, by the way. You see how he got confused for a second because he realized nobody said that. That's what he said. And he asked them, but they answered in a kind of evasive way. This person is a clown. This is a character. He is playing a role.
Do you still think it was a good idea, General Austin, to get out of Afghanistan?
I support the president's decision.
Yeah, I think.
Pick a lane, man. Where you if you're going to try to make an analogy, at least connect the dots. You're trying to say here is that the idea is that by stopping the support, it ended up badly. But they're terrible overlaps. The reality of Afghanistan is a shocking failure because they never were there to stop terrorism. I mean, a child in kindergarten right now could recognize that reality. Lindsey Graham either doesn't know it or doesn't care. All of it is, we shouldn't have left, therefore arm Israel. That's his argument, I guess.
You do. I think it was a disastrous decision. If we stop weapons necessary to destroy the enemies of the state of Israel at a time of great peril, we will pay a price. This is obscene. It is absurd. Give Israel what they need to fight the war they can't afford to lose.
My God.
This is Hiroshima and Nagasaki on steroids.
Wow. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. So you just compared what Israel's doing to the open bombing of a civilian population with nuclear weapons? Yeah, I agree with you, man. I don't think you thought that through. I think he thinks you're going to assume what that was some kind of triumph over evil. It's the easiest thing in the world to recognize that at the very least that you bombed a city full of civilians 2 times. So again, guys, either he's trying to send a secret message to Israel that we're okay with you murdering this entire area of Rafah, or he is that stupid. I mean, it wasn't even a good analogy. At the end of the day, he supports murder and arming of genocide. That's what he's talking about. It's terrifying to me because these people have power. And here again is this Israeli entity. So over here, you've got Lindsey Graham pretending to be a representative of the United States, saying that we have to give them whatever they need. And here she is at the same time over in Israel saying, oh yeah, you're not going to give us what we need. We're just going to do whatever we want. We're going to bomb people with indiscriminate missiles. That's what she says. And so we're not supposed to connect those dots and be like, they just said, if you give them, they're going to, I mean, the point is they're killing innocent people. They're proudly waving this in front of your face. And Lindsey Graham can't even acknowledge that. How do you see that as anything but dishonest? Now, here is what Lindsey Graham is pretending isn't happening or really wants to continue. Times of Gaza reports, day 215, just the past 24 hours, 4 massacres committed by Israel, 60 people killed, 110 injured. One day. That happened every single day. Now, here are 2 clips that I want you to see in regard to, and we're going to get into a lot of the stuff around these conversations. Matt Miller, painfully sidestepping obvious realities. As I said, it's just painful to watch this monster twist himself into a pretzel to avoid any accountability for Israel's shockingly blatant war crimes. Crimes that even the mainstream media are now being forced to openly call out in order to stop the hemorrhaging of their dwindling following.
Senior UNRWA official Scott Anderson told Politico the other day that IDF units are already on the ground in Rafah, killing dozens of people there, including kids. He also said one of the units is the same that killed 7 World Central Kitchen workers.
And just stop on that one point alone. They're getting direct reporting from people in this room, which, by the way, I'm not saying that means it's true, but in what world are we not recognizing this like seismic shift where people in the room that used to be towing the lines everywhere are going, we just got reports that they're already killing children and they're already doing all the things that you claim they've never done in Rafah right now. That's because it's already happening. We can all see it. I mean, that's shocking. It's jarring because we've never been in this position before. And watch how he responds.
Including an American, of course. So he's saying the idea.
And you mentioned the World Central Kitchen. It's one of the groups that was involved with killing them that they pretended to sanction and then never did. And they're there killing children. That's what he just said.
On the ground in Rafah, killing dozens of people there, including kids. He also said one of the units is the same that killed 7 World Central Kitchen workers, including an American, of course. So he's saying the IDF is already killing people, to Said's point, kind of, you know, in a way that questions this line between major and minor operations. And one of these units is one that ostensibly killed an American. So how is the U.S. letting an Israeli unit that killed an American now continue to kill Palestinians? Like, is that not a red line?
So I'm just not able.
And before he answers, remember, that was the group that we were talking about investigating. It's an ongoing investigation. And one guy even asked, well, one of them, you haven't finished investigating, but you're still arming them. And they're like, well, yeah, well, and they just kind of walk away from it. The point is, well, that means you don't care. If you know that there's reports they're committing crimes and you fund them until you find out, that's about as stupid as saying, keep taking those shots until we find out if they're dangerous, which is what happened, at least in the lie about AstraZeneca. They yank it off and go, oh, sorry, turns out you were right for 4 years. No, the point is that they didn't care. It's not safe to continue using the thing that seems like it might be until you find out for sure. That's agenda. It's the same thing here. You don't give them weapons until you find out, oh, now we know for sure. There are clear allegations from people standing as well as evidence over the top everywhere about how they're committing crimes, and they're still funding them. That's the truth. Oops.
Now continue to kill Palestinians. Like, is that not a red line?
So I'm just not able to verify that report. And since I'm not able to verify that report,
That's always how it goes. I haven't heard of that, and I'm not sure. We'll talk about it later.
I'm not able to comment on any implications of it.
Okay, but conceivably, I mean, well,
red line. Bottom line, I can't verify that to be true, so I can't talk about any possible implications for something I don't know to be true.
But just to follow up on that,
so he's actually arguing we don't know for sure that they've killed children, or the argument is that you assume every one of them was a human shield, which even then, by the way, going back to day one, still does not justify it. That's the reality of this. Even if every single one of them is tied to Hamas's legs, it is still collective punishment the way they're carrying this out. That was the day one argument, and it's still the same today. The government just ran roughshod right over the conversation. They're still pushing. But the United Nations and people involved, like Francesca Albanese, were very clear about the provable reality of international law. They don't care.
What is the latest on the unit that did kill the World Central Kitchen workers?
Oh, yeah?
I don't have any updates to offer on that.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, we don't care. You mean that investigation that we'd asked you 4 weeks ago that you just were still investigating and now we don't know? No update? How much you want to bet that it never gets resolved, like every other thing they put off?
And then, secondly, it's been 101 days now since Hindu Job, her family members, medics sent to save her were killed. So first question related to that is there an update on the investigation into that attack?
I don't have anyone. I'm happy to go back and get you the latest.
So that's buried mass graves, the shooting of the people. Oh, yeah, we have to follow up on that. Well, that's the same thing you said 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so she's one of 14,000 kids killed. Israeli forces have killed those World Central Kitchen workers. Of course, there's 100 more. President Biden admits Israel has killed civilians with U.S. weapons. We have the delay of them.
That's right, by the way. Biden himself on an interview admitted that they have killed children. Whether it's a byproduct or not. Isn't that enough? Like, isn't that the reality is that it's very clear that they're now beginning to admit some element of this. And they're still, in a weird way, the dynamic is Matt Miller still stands up and acts like we have yet to verify a single crime. So we're still investigating. Biden just literally said it on news. I mean, the point is Biden, I think, is stumbling into certain things like using the word occupation. Doesn't change the fact that we can see it. We could prove it.
Memo as to whether or not the U.S. determines whether Israel has violated national law. With all of this, I understand, there's been a pause on one shipment of weapons. You have said, other shipments are under review. But how did the U.S. feel comfortable sending Israel $17 billion if we can't get answers to any of this?
Right.
And how can it justify sending any more weapons at this point?
Yeah, that's a logical question that he won't answer with a logical answer. But the point is that you just said we stopped one shipment. That's the point. And we're reviewing the others. Now, how do you even make sense of that? What was the point with the one shipment? Is that a unique shipment that somehow is especially dangerous? And if so, why is it even being used? The point is that it's not. It's about a token. You're making it look like you care. You're hoping that other mindless media report as we're stopping shipment. That's not what's happening. You're reviewing the others. Okay, what's the difference between shipment 1 and shipment 2? Why would one stop and then the very one next behind it? Well, we're reviewing that one. It's the same damn shipment of weapons. It's the same concept. Obviously the same point. We're being manipulated.
So 2 things can be true at the same time, and 2 things are true at the same time here. One, that we do have concerns about certain ways that Israel has conducted operations. We've been open and forthright about those.
Oh, we care. We're concerned about it, but we haven't done anything to stop it, though. But we're really concerned, guys. I'm really concerned. Now here's some more weapons.
Engaged with the government of Israel about ways they can improve their operations to minimize civilian harm. We've seen them take some steps. We haven't seen them take enough. And
it's just hilarious. Remember the beginning narrative was that they're taking every measure possible? Funny how that shifted, isn't it? So every measure possible became you need to do more. I'd love them to explain that discrepancy.
Of course, that has led us to have concerns about how a Rafah operation would unfold. That is one thing that's true. The other thing that's true is that we are committed to Israel's defense. Israel is a democracy in the Middle East that is a long time.
All right, so the other thing that's true is we're going to do it anyway, so shut up. That's what, I mean, what's the meaning of that? The other truth is that we're committed to doing it? How do you even take that as anything? You just literally said, we are concerned about these things, and the other truth is we don't care about those things, and we're going to do it anyway. These guys, I mean, they must be so completely trapped in their lies. I know he feels uncomfortable. I can see it in his face every time he does this, because everybody in the room knows he's lying. And even the people in that room that used to toe the lines are not asking questions like that. They put him in a very uncomfortable position, and they make him look really dumb. And he's not a dumb person. I mean, he's actually much better at this than KJP and plenty of others. Even though that's White House, we're still talking about the same propagandizing of the narrative. Here's another one that's important. I'm not going to play the whole thing, I think, but this is just a flashback, first of all, of, remember, October 10th. 80 children have been killed. 80. And by the way, by October 10th, Amnesty, if you haven't seen this, I'm sure you have, you watched this show, had already come out with their, or already finished, by the way, it came out on the 20th. Oh, I'm sorry, I went to the 12th. But they, 7th to the 12th, they already found out that Gaza was war crimes are being committed. Damning evidence of war crimes as Israeli attacks wipe out entire families. Proved it, but nobody cared. Kept going because the U.S. is a complete, we're talking about an illegitimate government at this point. It doesn't care about what its own people thinks, let alone caring about civilian lives in the world. But when 80 people were killed, children, just 80 children, we're at 15,000 plus at this point. His outrage about how October 7th, there are women and children and everything that was going, which, by the way, it's any human life matters. Apparently that's racist today, that all lives matter. How is that racist? The point is that it's crazy to see that we're here in this position now with more than 15,000 killed, and we can't apply the same logic. This has been an ongoing cover-up from day one. And by the way, it shouldn't surprise you, that's what their job is, to obfuscate.
Has the right to defend itself. It has the right to take action against the terrorists who launched this brutal attack and killed Israeli civilians. It killed American civilians, killed mothers and children and babies and kidnapped children.
Nope. Half of that's false. And on top of that, we recognize that you only care about the Americans taken from Israel, but you don't care about the Americans, over 600 of them trapped in Gaza, many of which are probably dead now. Your American U.S. government disregarded that Americans were trapped, some of which weren't even from Palestine. They were just American Palestinians that were there visiting and got trapped, one of which was killed. It's showing you the woman who died in the hospital bed. They didn't even talk about that. Are they less American because they are partly Palestinian? Like, these people don't care about any of that. It's the reality of what they are, and what they pretend to be is what they think you want.
And what's Israel doing?
And so they are going to take action to respond to this terrorist attack.
Do you have any idea on the number of Palestinians killed by Israel in the last 4 days?
I have seen public reports.
What are these?
I am not going to speak to Saeed, I'm going to speak to what the U.S. government can verify, which I've done with a number of U.S. citizens. I will let Israel speak to the number of Israeli citizens that have killed, as well as the number of Palestinians that have killed.
Do you acknowledge that 80 Palestinian children have been killed? Do you acknowledge that? Will you?
And by the way, this is why I think we never see Max in there anymore, because you get the right dynamic in there. Matt Lee, Saeed Arakat, you get Sam Husseini and Max Blumenthal, and all of a sudden you get this dynamic where Matt can't just bull rush over people. Matt Miller. And the point is that clearly, when you watch how this goes next, he can only try to act like you're being, show some decorum, and you shut up over there. I'm trying to act, until you keep going, and he's forced eventually to answer the questions. That's why I don't think some of these people. I'm surprised they still let people like any of those three, or any of those four, still in there. I haven't seen Max in a while, but Sam, Saeed, and Matt Lee, I'm surprised they let all of them in there, because they're constantly asking questions that make him look stupid. But Sam in particular, by the way, because I think he does an amazing job in here, and I'm surprised they still let him back in. And we actually talked about that in our interview with Sam a while back. But watch how this goes.
Do you even acknowledge that?
Let me finish.
80 Palestinian children killed this week?
Again.
Babies? Do you acknowledge that?
You asked a question. I will answer the question.
Okay, well, that's my question.
Israel has the right to secure its country the way any country does. It has the right to defend itself against terrorism. It has the right to hold terrorists accountable. And I will say, ultimately, the Hamas terrorists who launched these operations, there is no one who has more disregard for Palestinian civilian life than those terrorists. Because those terrorists, let me finish.
Not the people who killed
those terrorists
850 Palestinians, mostly civilians, bombing residential towers, bombing offices.
We seem to have a lot of new people. Those terrorists launched this activity knowing that there would be retaliation, knowing that Israel would have to defend itself as any country did, knowing that it would lead to the unfortunate loss of civilian lives.
They're not seeking the release of Palestinian captives in Israeli prisons.
Let me go ahead.
That's amazing.
So baby killing is okay here.
Why can't you acknowledge the death
so
of
baby
Palestinian
killing is
children?
okay here.
You can't even acknowledge it.
We always mourn the loss of civilian life. It is an unfortunate circumstance every time it happens. And as I just said, the Hamas terrorists who launched this terrorist attack, knowing that it would produce the loss of not just direct Israeli lives, who they took in their incursions across the border, but also the loss of Palestinian civilian life.
Oh, so as I said before, your argument is you know that they're genocidal, right? You knew that Israel would kill civilians, so it's on you. Stop hitting yourself. Like, so you're literally making the argument that because Israel is so belligerently willing to kill civilians, that it's Hamas's fault for even pushing them into doing it. Like, I can't even believe the lack of logic to that argument. You know, and as you just see there, the kind of pushback where he gets forced to come back to answer the question. And I just love that. Anyway, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep going. I want to wrap this up here. In regard to Rafah, and last 2 points here, Saul makes a good point that heavy shelling in Rafah this morning, this was yesterday, which, by the way, the bombing of Rafah has been going on long before this. As much as people are only now seeing it, in some cases, the bombing has been going on long before they claim they were beginning the invasion. Don't forget that. But they write, notice how Western politicians are now saying the Red Line is a full or major offensive, which, by the way, those are random metrics. They're not metrics. Full or major versus partial, it's just a game of words. The point is they're going in, they're bombing, they're killing people. This is them trying to pretend that Israel doing it even though they didn't want them to, is somehow they're on the same page. It's not. Israel did it. They at least outwardly claim they didn't want them to, and they did it anyway. And now they're going, well, it's not a full invasion, so we're on the same page. It's embarrassing, which allows Israel to get on with the killing so long as everybody agrees it's only a partial slaughter. It's just embarrassing. It's gross. And Alon Mizrahi points out, Israeli media reports about briefings from high-level sources that, quote, the Operation Rafah is going on at full force. So this is an Israeli reporting from Israel, and he is saying Israeli high-level sources are openly saying that it's a full-force operation. As always, it's ridiculous that your government blatantly lies to you to support and protect a foreign entity at your expense, at the expense of everybody else in regard to Gaza and anywhere else, in fact. Who is this government actually fighting for at this point? They're hiding the truth from you for the interest of somebody else. It says, if demonstrations don't become extremely disruptive in the near future, and if life in the West doesn't become unbearable, by this time next year, Israel will have killed 1 million Gazans. That's 1 million. He says only 2 things can stop the U.S.-Israeli Holocaust: major civil unrest in the West or a wider regional war that will shatter life in Israel. He says neither Israel nor the U.S. are stopping it before Gaza has no more Palestinians in it. He says, and this will be controversial, this is a final solution, in all caps. This is an Israeli Jew reporting from Israel. Shouldn't make any difference to the truth, but it does for some people. Now, Euromed Human Rights Monitor highlights some pretty horrifying realities. Now, here forward, you're going to see some somewhat graphic things, so just keep that in mind if you've got children watching. Investigation by Euromed Human Rights Group field teams have revealed that Israeli army's commission of a mass killing crime against a Palestinian family while evacuating in Gaza without justification or necessity, like all the rest of them, resulting in the death of 12 of its members, including women and children. In the podcast, it's just showing dead bodies scattered around the street, executed by the Israeli army with 2 missiles directly fired by a drone. an area that was not witnessing clashes. And by the way, the drones that have been supplied by groups like with colleges, for example, like MIT, that are funding these programs. It says 12 civilians were killed, 5 women, 4 children. It's not even being reported in the media. Forced to evacuate their homes and then bomb in the street, just like we keep telling you. The reality, guys, is this happens constantly. That's the sad reality of this. This happens nonstop, over and over. Now, here's an interesting overlap to this. Now, I'm thinking, let's see what time we got. Yeah, we should be good. I think this is an important back and forth. Now, we talked about this on Pasta's show, and I think Piers Morgan is not somebody honest in this conversation. He's just not. I mean, the guy his positions are constantly weak and in a weird backhanded way, almost in some cases supporting the same agenda while acting like he's fighting it. But nonetheless, this clip is an important point. That what I said on Pasta's show is the same thing, that this is not a brave moment. This is Piers Morgan acknowledging the shockingly self-evident thing that the rest of the media is ignoring. Sort of like the reverse of what Joe Scarborough is doing, right? Well, everybody in the media, the international community all says the same. So, yeah, well, you're wrong, and they're all wrong. Or really, the point is they're all knowingly lying, and that's the bigger picture. So in this case, what he's doing is calling out this guy for the obvious circular logic that he's putting forward. The obvious reality that what he's saying, if when turned the other way, proves that they either don't care about civilian casualties or they're not even bothering to look while they're counting what they claim are Hamas members. But the truth is, we know that's not happening because they're just throwing out numbers. And I think that's what this really shows. But even Piers Morgan pushed on this. And I think it's because this has been something that is shockingly obvious from the very beginning. So either this was an organized effort to make it look like this is happening, or in any case, it's Piers taking advantage of something that they know we all know. Because I bet you he's getting comments and emails about it because it's that ridiculously obvious. Nonetheless, it is still fantastic to see an Israeli representative put on the spot like this and held to it for 4 minutes. It made him very uncomfortable. And this is what real journalism would look like if this was actually what was going on, constantly being done in the same way. What needs to happen?
How many civilians do you believe you've killed?
We don't have exact figures, as you know. It's the fog of war.
But you've got exact numbers for Hamas terrorists you've killed. Why wouldn't you know how many civilians you've killed?
Because obviously our focus is to go after the Hamas terrorists. And
hang on, I mean, that does imply that you're putting a bigger premium on killing Hamas terrorists in terms of numbers and accountability than you are on innocent civilians. That can't be right, surely. If you know exactly how many Hamas terrorists you've killed, you must know how many civilians you've killed. Otherwise, you're prioritizing the lives of terrorists over innocent people.
Piers, with respect, don't put words into my mouth, please. I didn't say exactly 14,000. I said around 14,000. Whereas Hamas will come out with precise numbers that statisticians will look at.
Give me a ballpark number for civilians.
Well, you can use the ballpark as far as the Hamas figures, which I reject as being false.
Well, if they're false, why would you give me those?
Right. What a ridiculous
claim. I gave you the numbers that I had.
No, you've told me you know how many Hamas terrorists you've killed, but you don't seem to have any idea how many civilians you've killed. I'm just bemused. Why wouldn't you keep count of both?
I don't have that information to give you, Piers. If I did, I would.
You literally no idea how many civilians you've been killing.
I can tell you definitively that our aim is to go after Hamas.
No, hang on. I'm sorry to push you on this. That's quite extraordinary. You're an official spokesman for the Israeli government, and you have no idea how many civilians you've killed. I thought you just told me that you were particularly careful about not killing civilians. But if you don't know how many you've killed, how can you say that with any certainty?
That's basic self-evident
Even
logic.
if you were to go by a ratio of the Hamas figures, we would still be far ahead of any Western army.
That wasn't my question. You know it wasn't my question.
I don't have the information.
Well, you literally have no idea how many civilians you've killed.
It's not that I don't know. I'm not authorized to give the information. I don't have the information.
That's complete nonsense. Why are you authorized to give me the number of terrorists you've killed, but not the number of civilians? I don't understand.
In a couple of years ago, that would have ended it right there.
Piers, we will go after Hamas. We will ensure that we.
You want me to believe you're being incredibly careful about how many civilians you're killing, and you have an amazing exemplary record, but you don't know how many civilians you're killing. So how do I know you've been careful?
Piers, when the dust settles, we will come out with the proper numbers. Hamas runs to the press daily with false.
When the dust settles, a lot of people will have died, and you know how many Hamas you've killed, but you don't know how many civilians you've killed. And I'm just asking you why. Why is it you've kept a record of one, but not the other?
They know both. They don't know either.
I personally don't have that information to give to you. You can ask me over and over. I'm not going to come up with more information. I don't personally
you don't know.
Authorized.
I don't have that information for you.
But you're an official government spokesman for the Israeli government, and you have no idea.
He said he was not authorized.
I came on here to focus on what's going on with the war.
Well, actually, you came on here to answer my questions, I think.
Yeah, and I don't have an answer for you for that.
And I didn't intend to press you on this point because I assumed that you would not respond the way you have. But I've never had an Israeli spokesman who simply said, I have no idea. Particularly after you boasted about the fact that you've been very smart in the way you've avoided killing civilians. How do you know if you've got no idea how many you've killed?
How do you claim that?
I know the way in which the IDF operates. I know the way in which we go after the terrorists in the best possible way. It's not what I've said. It's what General Petraeus has said. It's what John Spencer from West Point has said. It's what multiple British generals have said. Israel goes out of its way to avoid civilian casualties. That's what we'll do. If you can point to me to another conflict by which they have evacuated, got out of harm's way civilians to the extent that Israel has done, then fine.
Sorry, with respect, Mr. Hyman, how can you possibly expect me to accept any comparisons to any other conflict or war, given that you do not know how many civilians you've killed?
Piers, you understand that I can't prosecute the war over the media.
I'm just asking you for basic information. I'm not trying to trap you, and I'm not trying to unfairly harangue you. I think people are watching this and they'll make their own conclusions. I just find it astonishing that the moment I asked you how many Hamas you killed, you could tell me immediately, and the moment I ask you about civilians, you haven't got a clue, literally. That you're not even prepared to issue a ballpark number. And I think people will find that staggering, particularly given that you are insistent that you're doing everything you can to avoid killing civilians. To which, again, I just simply ask, how do you know? If you don't know how many you're killing, how can you possibly be sure that you are, A, doing better than other people waging war elsewhere, or B, that you have any idea how many you're killing? You don't, clearly.
And the other point, where's that button? Sorry. Right. I mean, is that so the major overlap there is that you either know both or you don't know either. And I think it's obvious that what they're doing is indiscriminately bombing everywhere and then just racking. And by the way, this was actually proven right in the beginning, right? There's a beginning aspect of this where they came out, and this was proven. I think the Cradle did a coverage on this. I think it might have been Mondoweiss, where they highlighted the fact that all they were doing, and this was easily proven, we're taking the casualty numbers and then reporting that in Israel as here's how many terrorists we've killed. That's easy to understand. We're talking like, look, here's the equivalent of that today. We've killed 50,000 terrorists. That's not what they're saying anymore because that's so obvious, but that's what they were doing in Israel because they claimed 50,000 deaths. So what did that show you? That means that they either don't know, they're just calling them all terrorists, or they don't even care to check. And we know that's what's happening as they're calling them all terrorists, Amalek, and posting videos about murdering them in the back. I mean, constantly. And so Piers Morgan doing that, I think, was a very important moment just because it was so shocking to the average person to see that if you have the smallest amount of it's not even intelligence, it's like just deductive logic. You can stand back and go, okay, what Piers just said there is easy to understand. You can't say, we've done more than any other war before this, and then act like you don't know or you're unwilling to tell us the amount of civilian casualties. And then say that even if we don't know that we're supposed to assume that you just know that number and it is less than other wars. I mean, that's blind support, which is what most of these places are doing. Even Pierce, in every other circumstance, it just shows you that most of the media is complicit. And I don't even think it's because they think they support genocide. It's because they're somewhere in them. Their job is to go along with whatever narrative they're supposed to go along with. I don't even know if they outwardly acknowledge that in most cases. I know some of them do. But that's what this mainstream corporate media does, guys. And here is what Jonas Tarawi is reporting as of yesterday. At least 20 Palestinians murdered after Israeli warplanes bombed Abu Sharia's family home in Saba neighborhood. Children, women killed. I mean, I'm just going to show you selective examples, but this is a constant moment to moment, day after day, nonstop reality for Gaza, but in particular right now, Rafah, the whole place where they claim they needed a plan. New Israeli massacre in Gaza City, this was the 8th, claimed 13 lives, mostly children. A heinous military operation in southern Rafah. Continual bombing, guys, one after another. Here's an American and German rockets are incinerating the bodies of Palestinian children. This is the worst part for me. These children that their skin have been burned off. You know, the children that was crying and calling for his father who couldn't even hug him because his whole body is burned. I mean, this is the stuff that will sit with us for the rest of our lives. And it's the fault of the people who, like Lindsey Graham and the rest of the government, that are acting like this is not real, or acting like these are human shields and lying about everything that's going on, while calling for more weapons support. This is Syrian Girl reporting where the $1 million Holocaust Museum, where are the $1 million Holocaust museums that will show this? The line of dead children, the children being pulled out of rubble, the bodies that are being shown that are not tied to somebody's leg, that are simply in a room, that were murdered inside of a building that nobody wants to acknowledge. Now here's a report from CNN. And it's the same point we're making, guys, that this is even coming out through corporate media. And even this, by the way, is in many ways burying larger truths. But as long as I can get people to see who might not have already seen it, that whether it's corporate media or anybody else, that they are murdering innocent people, they are treating Palestinians like they're terrorists, whether or not they have any information about that, that is a step in the right direction. Oh, yeah, I forgot. I don't want to bother you with the background stuff. Hold on, I have to delete something. Still giving me trouble here. So as this loads, this is, again, a CNN report, which, take that with a grain of salt, that it, the salt lick that we should take with anything coming from corporate media. But the reality, as it's titled, strapped down, blindfolded, held in diapers. Israeli whistleblowers detail abuse of Palestinians in shadowy detention centers. And this is happening everywhere. And we keep seeing this. And what do you get from the people online? The same old people I point out every time. Look at all the terrorists that Mossad captured. Look at all the terrorists that came out of their holes. Eli David or Elon Levy or all the rest of them say, right? And every single time you can come back and prove that most of them, if not all of them, were in no way connected. And I only say most because there's ones that they claim are Hamas. Not to say that I even think that. The point is, even they let go most of them claiming they weren't. But what they do in the first place? They tortured them. They threatened them. There's videos of them showing how they do that and proudly showing it. And people like Elon Levy and the rest will act like, in the first place, we know they're all terrorists. How is the average person not able to piece that together? Most of us are.
It's a place the Israeli military doesn't want us to see.
How many Palestinians are in there right now?
Who are you? Give me please now. Hang on, what is it that you want? Can I have my card?
But CNN has gained exclusive evidence of Palestinian prisoner abuse from multiple Israeli whistleblowers. At the Sedi Taman facility in southern Israel, we joined human rights activists amid growing public concern for the detainees being held inside. This is a protest by Israeli citizens outside a detention centre close to Gaza, where we know hundreds of Palestinians have been held. You can see it's a closed military facility. It's behind a barbed wire fence. We're not permitted access. And there's hostility from passers-by.
We just had somebody drive past in a car and they shouted out to us in Hebrew, "You're defending murderers."
No.
You're defending, what do you,
No, we're defending basic human rights.
And eyewitnesses are now speaking out. Away from the military facility, near the beaches of Tel Aviv, one young Israeli army reservist agreed to speak about scores of detainees at Sedi Taman. He says are kept in cages or pens, constantly shackled and blindfolded, many for weeks on end. We've hidden
Palestinians, not Hamas members,
to shield him from prosecution.
We were told they are not allowed to move and must sit upright. They're not allowed to talk or peek under their blindfolds.
And what happened if they did do that? What kind of punishments were meted out?
We were allowed to pick out problematic people and punish them, having them stand with their hands above their heads for an unlimited time. If they didn't keep their hands up, we could zip tie them to the fence.
The Israeli military says detainees are handcuffed based on their risk level and health status. But the account tallies with photographic evidence obtained by CNN of Palestinian detainees inside Sidi Taman.
Like Guantanamo style, guys. They torture them just because they're there.
By dozens of Palestinians released back into Gaza. I was zip-tied and blindfolded, says this former detainee, and tortured in a way I never imagined. One source telling us the restraints were so tight they had to amputate a man's hand.
The view
It's
that
happened a
I've
lot,
heard
by the way.
expressed is that, how do you think Israeli hostages are treated by Hamas?
This sentiment was voiced in the facility, but I think that if Hamas is so abominable, which I agree with, then why use Hamas as a bar? It's a descent into dehumanization.
A descent
See, and
that's
this is what I mean.
accelerated since the rampage by Hamas on October the 7th last year. The killing and abduction to Gaza of hundreds of Israelis provoked outrage and a brutal response. Amid Israel's wrath, tens of thousands of Palestinians have been killed and thousands detained for interrogation, transported to facilities like Sidi Taman, where one Israeli guard now tells CNN prisoners are routinely beaten. We've hidden his identity and voice too.
You can take them out and hit them maybe 4 or 5 times with a club. It's not done in the face, so you don't see blood. The detainees lie belly down, being hit and kicked, people screaming and dogs barking at them. It's terrifying. Some detainees are taken away and beaten really hard, so bones and teeth are broken.
So you saw people who were subject to these beatings, who had their bones broken and who had their teeth broken.
Yes, it's a practice which commanders know about. They want intelligence, but they also want revenge and punishment for what happened on October 7th.
The Israeli military hasn't approved CNN's requests for access to Sidi Taman. But at the gates of the facility, we challenged the Israeli guards.
How many Palestinians are in there right now? Don't know. Do you know if they're being handcuffed? Are they being blindfolded? No.
This is a facility.
As we leave, masked soldiers approach.
Hello, how are you? I'm filming this place. It's a property of the army. Oh. So
Who are you guys? I'm from CNN.
Now imagine what happened if they weren't CNN.
Give me please now. Give me please now. Hang on, what is it?
Yeah, democracy, right? Press freedom. Look at this.
Then
Imagine if they weren't CNN. Imagine if it was a Palestinian group. Journalists. You know what
We're
would
driving
happen.
now to meet one Israeli with personal experience of the Sidi Taman facility. It's experience that he says has left him shocked at the condition and the medical treatment of Palestinian detainees there. Hello.
He told us he treated Palestinian detainees with gunshot wounds fresh from the war zone in Gaza, but was appalled at the lack of equipment and expertise.
The problem is, Gazans who are brought in are labeled as terrorists, and it is very popular opinion over here that terrorists deserve to die, so they do not deserve the same medical care as everyone else.
Satellite imagery obtained by CNN shows how the Sidi Taman facility was expanded after the October 7th attacks, with detention facilities and makeshift medical bays being added after public hospitals in Israel refused to treat injured Gazan suspects.
Wow.
Eyewitness accounts describe a field hospital with 15 to 20 patients, virtually naked and blindfolded, with hands and feet shackled to their beds and wearing diapers. One eyewitness told CNN painful procedures were carried out by underqualified medics. Treatment the medical workers.
Guys, how is this not like Nazi Germany style stuff, guys? This is not a hard thing to wrap your mind around.
Total vulnerability. If you imagine being unable to move, being unable to see what's going on, that's something that borders, if not crosses, into psychological torture.
The Israeli military says prisoners are stripped for security checks and that investigations are opened when there's suspicion of misconduct. Still, accounts from Israelis and Palestinians inside and the shocking images paint a disturbing picture. Matthew Chance, CNN, at Sedi Taman in southern Israel.
Right, let's not forget that we're talking about things like Guantanamo Bay, where we saw very similar treatment. Where do you think that training and overlap came from? Right, it goes both ways, but let's realize there's a reason these things look the same. And it's horrifying to me that we act like this isn't happening. Like, this is, for crying out loud, this is CNN. And that doesn't mean that I mean that because they say it, that makes it true. It's shocking to see this on such a high-level corporate outlet that's highlighting the things that in real time, the government and Israel's government and a lot of the people around their power structures are screaming is fake news and racism, and also is CNN and Jew-hating outlet now? Like, how do you make sense of that without realizing that we're being lied to? I know you guys know this. 99% of what you just heard in that CNN clip, you've already heard from me. The point is that this is important to see the shift in the conversation. So here is highlighting this image, by the way, where you can see the torture of these people, and he reiterates. And this is Omar Shakir saying, and he's from Human Rights Watch, saying amputated limbs due to overcuffing. Guys, this has been an ongoing reality since long before October 7th, but it's been a lot of coverage since then. Stripped detainees in diapers fed through straws, which, by the way, means they're letting them defecate in their bed because they have a diaper on. This is torture we're talking about. And of course, here's what Jared Smith says. Can't wait for the expose on Hamas treatment of its hostages and other detainees. Like, these people are just, I mean, who knows if this is a bot or whatever else, but the point is this is somebody who can't even acknowledge what's right in front of you because you're acting like, well, Hamas would be worse, would be the assumption that, by the way, there's a mountain of evidence proving right now that's not what's happening to them. And again, I don't even need to go into it. 15 different people that have come back from Gaza are now telling us to this very day that they were treated kindly, that they were given food, that they weren't tortured. And yet this guy, all he can do is go, I can't wait for you to do this over here. What? Let's even say you think that's important. Maybe it is. Can you not at least go time out? I can't support what they're doing. No, because they don't care about Palestinians. It's self-evident. There's no way you can ignore something like that. And don't forget, this is now the second time from a corporate outlet that we have an IDF members. In one case, I think there was more than one. This was an individual from the IDF in this case who have blown the whistle and told you openly crimes are being committed. Here's just the opening clip that I shared with this guy. You should definitely watch the entire show.
Do you think that you witnessed war crimes taking place?
Probably. The ground assumption is that they are Hamas. And then if you go this way, you're bound to kill people that are not.
Now, in a rare interview, one soldier tells us about the reality he says he witnessed.
What kind of stuff would they say?
There are no uninvolved, only unarmed. This is something that I'm going to carry for the rest of my life.
Deniable. Now, look, you can dispute the breadth of it, how many times it's happening and how many are doing it, but this is going on. And that means the U.S. government, the Israeli government, and everybody else behind it gaslighting are actively hiding crimes they know are being committed. This is Channel 4 in the UK, mainstream media. Haaretz has covered it countless times. They've called out the lies of the Hannibal directive, or the truth of the Hannibal directive, the lies around October 7th. It just keeps going. They keep dragging this zombie genocide narrative forward, or the zombie narrative around the hiding the genocide. The point is the IDF whistleblower has admitted institutional war crimes, that they've seen it. And now another one's coming out. And with all the evidence we have, I can't believe this is actually still ongoing. Jonas also points out this, going back, he's been covering this from the very beginning, showing you the lies about this. But here's more images, more documentation in Khan Yunis, showing dozens of Palestinians kidnapped, treated the same. These aren't terrorists. These are not Hamas members. Now, here's a sad reality, talking about the Nazi overlap, guys. But what you're about to see here is pretty shocking to me. Now, these are the people I argue that there are, I only say argue because I don't know that they all voluntarily went here, but that I argue are the people that at the very least have been driven or chose to move along to the place they drove them to just because they know that Israel's going to bomb Rafah. But the problem is that they also know they're going to bomb them along the way. They're going to bomb where they go. But, for whatever reason, and I can't dispute that, who knows what's safer. I don't know. They would probably know better than me that they choose to go along with what Israel's asking of them. But just look at how this looks to you. As Uncover points out, this is not a Nazi concentration camp in World War II in 1945. This is Gaza concentration camp in 2024. As they write, a Holocaust is happening right before our eyes and the world is silent. Never again apparently means nothing to people unless you're talking about Zionists. But watch what this looks like. This is an Israeli Jeep driving by. Look at all these people just huddled together, fearful, babies in hands, people in crutches. I mean, God damn it, this is the worst thing in the world. It's just so horrifying to watch these people. These people have been driven from their homes. They've been family members have been killed. Some of them been raped and abused and tortured. And they're just getting pushed from place to place. And this is not supposed to be a problem for people. This is unprecedented in my mind, guys. This is overwhelming. Here's what Blinken says about the very Israeli units that they pretended they were going to sanction. Blinken says Israeli units accused of serious violations, no, they've done enough to avoid sanctions. They've done enough. And you know what that means? Community service. The Secretary of State told Congress that Israel had adequately punished a soldier who got community service for killing an unarmed Palestinian. That's not a joke. That's not a parody. That's not the Babylon Bee. This is Blinken from the United States openly on the record with ProPublica saying, well, they gave the guy community service, so he shouldn't be charged with a crime for killing an unarmed Palestinian. I almost fell out of my chair with this. Not because I don't know this, but because I can't believe that they're becoming so blatant, so on the surface with their open hatred for Palestinians, or maybe they don't even realize it. As she says, the only reason Blinken thinks community service for murder, which he's not even denying, is adequate punishment is because he doesn't think Palestinians are human beings. I don't know how you think otherwise. I don't know how you don't see exactly what she's saying. I completely agree. Here is what the representative from South Africa, the one that was leading the International Criminal Court accusations, the truth of the genocide. Here's what she has to say. If an African leader had committed 1% of what Netanyahu has done, or the entire Israeli government is complicit in, and the United States government as well, the warrant would have been issued several months ago. And we all know that.
The International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over the situation in Palestine. And we have previously called on the Office of the Prosecutor to urgently lead a thorough and impartial investigation into this matter, one that complies with international legal standards, to establish the facts and bring those responsible to justice. If all of this were happening in Africa, they would have already issued warrants. It took 3 weeks to issue warrants on Putin, 7 months, nothing on Prime Minister Netanyahu and his ministers. Of course, you'd have seen in reports today that the prosecutor of the ICC has received, like me, a letter from congressmen who have indicated that if you dare to issue a warrant, we will deal with you. Same letter I have received.
That's just so crazy. They'll deal with you. What do you think that means? Those people like Tom Cotton, people like Tom Cruise. What the heck? God, I'm having the worst memory right now today. Tom, for some reason, Tom, of course, obviously jumped into my head that, it's Senator Cruz, Marco Rubio, and they were right in line with this. Why can't I remember Rubio or Cruz's first name? Who cares? The point is that they all happily signed on to a letter that was openly, belligerently threatening people who were trying to do their jobs. Ted Cruz, thank you. The Cradle writes, and this is in regard to Lebanon, even, guys. So as Lindsey Graham is trying to frame this as, they're all attacking Israel. By the way, Israel is illegally occupying every single one of these areas other than Iran, right? In Golan Heights in Syria, parts of Lebanon, all of Gaza. I mean, it's ridiculous. But it says several casualties in Israel's bombing of even southern Lebanon. Just because you're arguing that Lebanon is responding, who has a legal right to armed resistance, show me the casualties, Lindsey Graham. All he's doing is blatantly ignoring the fact that Israel is bombing Lebanon and killing innocent people, which has happened more than once, including a journalist from Reuters that was killed right in the beginning, that none of them cared about, that we talked about, and it took Reuters even 4 days to claim that, even though we proved it right the first day. Yet again, demonstrating our value. The point is that they don't care about the killing of people. They care about the narratives they're trying to push. And you're going to get upset, most likely, when you realize this happened. Even the illusion of accountability has now gone away. The Biden administration, their report on whether Israel was violating U.S. law, which Matt Miller has used to delay, we're investigating, we'll come back when we finish our report. Remember, he says it every time. Guess what? They have now delayed it indefinitely. I mean, guys, they're just pulling the mask off. Yes, we're criminals. Shut up. We don't care what you think. Right? Like, I don't know if this is being goaded on by Israel or if they're just realizing, you know what, the cat's out of the bag. Who cares? Let's just treat them like authoritarian governments openly do, because that's what we are. Just kill them when they protest, whatever else. You can't delay the report about the crimes that you claim will justify or not what's happening indefinitely and act like we don't recognize what that shows us, that you are cowards and you don't care about what's going on. It's disgusting. And of course, this Saul Rod is pointing out what he said before. We will always defend human rights at home and abroad, except when it comes to Israel, is what the finishing statement should be. Or anything that challenges their narratives of what they really think. The Cradle also reports Netanyahu, and this gets to finish quickly pointing out the continuing desire to occupy, like boots on the ground occupy, building illegal settlements occupy the rest of Gaza, because legally it's still completely occupying the area, which nobody with a brain would deny. Point is, Netanyahu wants, quote, the demilitarized civilian rule in Gaza with UAE and Saudi help. What that really translates to is our complete control over the entire thing until we get what we want, or we claim that they're still terrorists and pretend that never mattered. Exactly what's happened over and over in the past. And I'll show you that before we finish. B'Tselem highlights the fact that they're still they're demolishing homes in the West Bank. They're demolishing homes in Gaza. And guess what? They're demolishing homes in Israel. Yeah, that's right. So you have to realize this is not about anything other than getting rid of non-Zionists, anybody rather specifically in this case from the Jewish supremacist mindset that even B'Tselem calls out. But again, the Zionist-driven reality, they're now removing people they don't see in line with their ideology. It says, as described in B'Tselem 2021 position paper, and guys, this is an Israeli human rights group, the Israeli apartheid regime implements policies to promote the principle of Jewish supremacy on both sides of the Green Line in the occupied West Bank and inside Israel's sovereign territory. This is from Oren Ziv, who is a journalist from 972 magazine, an Israeli outlet. Israeli forces demolished the entire Bedouin village of Wadi Khalil in the Negev, leaving over 300 people without housing. They don't care about these people. And you realize all they just say is it's illegal. And the point is it's because they've never given these people permits for places that they are asking for. Same as anywhere else. So they can later look back and go, it's illegitimate, and just push them out of the way. Why? At least as B'Tselem is arguing, because it's a Jewish supremacist mindset that, in my opinion, is driven by Zionism. Now, here's the places we're talking about. Israel destroys dozens of Bedouin homes in Negev. Now, Robert's written about the Bedouin population for a long time. Just so we understand what we're talking about, is this is in the Negev desert. We're talking about Israel, not West Bank, not Gaza. So just understand that this is not some unique Hamas-only problem, guys. This is how they treat anybody they see as their adversary. Not honest people we're talking about here. Max Blumenthal highlights, and this is first what they say here, this photo is not from the Gaza envelope on October 7th. This destroyed homes area. These are people's homes. Nor, they continue, nor after a pogrom instigated by Jewish settlers in the West Bank, which has also happened. This photo was taken yesterday, on the 8th, a 15-minute drive from Beersheba. And Max writes, Israeli police destroyed yet another Bedouin village in the Negev on the grounds that it was unrecognized. Though the residents of Wadi al-Khalil are Israeli citizens, though. Israeli citizens, guys. Just like the Orthodox Jews, they're also Israeli citizens that they beat up every time they talk about Zionism. But his point is they are being ethnically cleansed off their land because they're not Jewish. How do we think this is something that's okay? Even if it's only about Judaism, which I believe it's more about Zionism and it's the Judaism manipulation, but I could be wrong. The bottom line is that how do people not recognize that this is ethno-nationalism, that this is colonial settlement? Everything we've talked about, these aren't buzzwords. These are what they openly are. It's what they previously have claimed they are, a settler colonialism project. This is ethnic cleansing and on full display. Now, on an overlap with that, and this is also in occupied Jerusalem, Francesca Albanese highlights this. First, the Direct Commissioner General of UNRWA highlights this evening, and this was on the 9th, Israeli residents, so just random Israeli residents, likely led by illegal settlers, by the way, because that's what usually pushes this forward, they set fire to the perimeter of a United Nations headquarter building for UNRWA in occupied East Jerusalem. There's zero accountability for this stuff. This is, by the way, this is not some Hamas headquarters. This is in East Jerusalem. This is a UN headquarters that is like the idea that Hamas is everywhere is just an illusion that's being spun. You could argue that UN might have, I personally would argue that about the UN body in general, but they have not produced any evidence that UNRWA is part of Hamas or from October 7th involved. The US and Canada and even Germany have called this out. I believe it was Germany, but many of their allies. This took place while UNRWA and other UN agency staff were on the compound. While there are no casualties among the staff, the fire caused extensive damage. Headquarters on its ground, a petrol and diesel station for the agency's fleet of cars. So it's affecting their ability to then do other things as well, which is probably the point. They'll turn around and blame them for not delivering things now because this is how this works. Our director, with the help of other staff, had to put out the fire themselves, and it took the Israeli fire extinguishers and police a while before they even turned up. Not a surprise. A crowd accompanied by armed men, that's my point, were witnessed outside the compound chanting, "Burn down the United Nations." These are all public, guys, and these are being ignored by the very people who always tell you to look to the people like the United Nations. Here is what Francesca wrote. She says, I used to work exactly in that compound. Exactly in that small building, which sits facing the compound's gas station. Now, is she a member of Hamas? You got to be pretty dumb to make these arguments today. It says, as an Israeli mob set fire to the perimeter near the gas station, a tragedy was miraculously averted. She says, this is not Gaza, where Israel rules lawlessly away from foreign eye. This is occupied Jerusalem, where most diplomatic missions and consulates and UN offices are. And now they're starting to set fire to these buildings with people inside. But Lindsey Graham's not going to say anything because they're cowards. And just a quick overlap as well. This is what happened to one person from a West Bank checkpoint. For those in the podcast, which is pretty hard to look at, the guy lost his eye. It's a big purple eye, and he shows you what happened. He got hit in the face with the butt of a gun because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's nonstop, and Robert can personally testify to the reality of that. Now, and lastly, on these last couple of points, let's realize that this is what it looks like to truly use the buildings they claim Hamas uses. You know, occupy hospitals and use human shields, right? He says, we have acquired documentation that actually confirms Israeli military use of facilities within the Turkish cancer hospital as a military headquarters. That is now the third time we've proven that they've turned hospitals into headquarters, and all they do is project and project and project. And they have a sniper position on top, obtained by a soldier account from the Carmeli Brigade, currently stationed in Netzarim corridor and from several days ago. Now, that's the point is there are people in these brigades that are speaking to the media everywhere. There is division everywhere right now. They're collapsing, guys. It's quite obvious to me. Now, lastly, let's talk about the smart city. And I think this is really important to end on. It's for me to understand what this truly means. Now, Robin Minotti simply shares this image that is from the Ynet News Israeli outlet. Here's what he has to say. Gaza 2035, a new smart, he says 15-minute city. That's nowhere in the discussion, but I argue it's probably exactly where they're going with this. But a smart city for sure, built on the mass graves of Palestinian children, because that's the truth. And he already, by the way, the pier was already using rubble with dead bodies in it. You literally saw the dump trucks driving by with dead hands laying out of the rubble that they used to then build what they're doing in the pier and other things. But it says new plans in Israeli media reveal what Israel want to do with Gaza post-genocide and land theft. The dystopian vision for the Gaza Strip is being currently approved by the Netanyahu government. This is real. Here's Ynet News. Gaza 2035. Exposure. This is the utopian vision for the Strip, which, by the way, Netanyahu's office is examining. And this is not even a new plan. The New York Times reported, this was on Friday today, that senior officials in Netanyahu's office have been examining in recent months a plan drawn up by businessmen under which Israel will manage the Gaza Strip together with other Arab countries for several years. So this is the game they're playing, acting like they're going to allow anything other than their constant and complete control over everything that's happening there. And it says until control can pass to Palestinians. That's what they're reporting. But when you read further down, it's clear that's never going to happen. It says already 2 months ago, they pushed for the first time Netanyahu's Singapore vision regarding Gaza. So it's Netanyahu's vision, interestingly enough. And now Ynet brings the full plan and its sections. So you can see, look at this. Overlapping with the Saudi Arabian concept. And this is like the vision of the Gaza Strip in regard to how it's supposed to look. I mean, this is like right out of like the zeitgeist things they've shown in the past, like the actual movement. And it says, in the presentation obtained by Ynet under the title From Crisis to Prosperity, a plan for the transformation of the Gaza Strip from Iranian aggression to the moderate axis. I mean, it's just stuff full of propaganda. And the bottom line is this was planned out long before October 7th. Pictures are shown that reflect a utopian vision for the Gaza Strip. The only thing they need, of course, is the Palestinians to get the hell out of the way, right? It appears to them as a green and prosperous land with towers and business centers. Of course, the reality is that we're talking about illegal Israeli settlers being the ones that do this, not Palestinians. Like, if they do anything, they'll allow them to keep a certain area within it, which they've already talked about. The South, which will corral them into, despite all of the area. They've openly said these things. It says the goal, Gaza prospers as a part of the Abrahamic regional architecture. The risk, Gaza is an Iranian outpost, which is not true, that disrupts the moderate regional architects. The point is what they're trying to say is that we can either bring them into what we think is this Abrahamic regional architecture, like the Abraham Accords. It's ridiculous, guys. That's about normalization with Israel, which is about forcing these countries to disregard what their peoples want in interest of whatever Israel wants. That's the real picture of it. And all they're saying is, the raw and bad guy terrorists over here versus what we'll turn them into. And if they don't, then they kill them all. Is the reality of what Israel is putting forward. The opportunity, Gaza prospers, it says, in the past as a crossroads between two ancient trade routes. The reality is Gaza was always historically a central point. And they want to turn it back into that again. And they want you to think that the Palestinians are somehow holding that up. That's what they're trying to frame, in my opinion. It says, as part of the plan, which was drawn up in November and presented to its senior members in November, Israel is supposed to create safe and Hamas-free areas. Well, they're telling you they're all Hamas, so you put that together. First in the north, then later throughout. Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Bahrain, Jordan, and Morocco are supposed to supervise the humanitarian aid that will be provided in the safe areas. Wait. The safe areas? Didn't you just tell us that we're talking about a new area for everybody, but now you're talking about specific safe areas? Well, that seems to imply that you're going to push all the Palestinians, or the ones you think are dangerous, into special camps and then deliver aid to them while you're working everything out. That sounds pretty ominous, but it says the phase of the program will last 12 months. Oh, good. So just 12 months in a camp. Got it. 12 months in your special safe zone. I wonder how long that will last once they claim Hamas fired a rocket. Or look, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is bad too. Oh, we got to stop everything. Mark my words. It says in the next phase, which will last between 5 and 10 years, after 12 months of special safe camps, Israel retains overall responsibility for security. Oh, big surprise. So just a quick 10-year period where Israel keeps doing exactly what it's doing. Everybody okay with that? Arab countries are creating a multilateral body. What they're talking about is specifically Arab governments that have normalized with Israel at the expense of their countries, not the Arab countries as a whole, that will oversee, direct, and finance the Gaza Reconstruction Authority. So now you're talking about no involvement of Palestinians. So you're talking about other Arab countries that are acting against their country's interests for Israel are the ones that are going to make. So it's the illusion of some kind of Arab overlap to making this happen. Palestinians from Gaza manage the Reconstruction Authority, they claim, which takes responsibility for managing the safe area. So all you're talking about is jamming them in specific areas and pretending they can control those little small spots while we dictate everything around you. I don't know why. This should be insulting to everybody. And it says the Marshall Plan, let's remember, was an American plan for reconstruction in Europe. I'll come back to that. They're comparing it to something I think we should be concerned about. It says in the long term, according to the businessman's plan, Israel will retain the right to act against security threats. So bottom line, Israel remains the control of the area no matter what narrative you throw over the top of it. Arab countries will transfer the power in Gaza to, they say, a Gazan or unified Palestinian government. So that just means whatever they want it to mean. So the point is, if it's a unified Palestinian government, that means if they create something in Palestine and name it the Palestinian government, that'll be the one that gave power to, whether or not it truly has any Palestinians in it. Okay, I think that's where we're going with this. The New York Times says it was stated that this will be done through a vote. in which the Gazans will decide whether they will annex to the Palestinian Authority or not. Do you realize how ridiculous that is? As Netanyahu and the rest of them have said, we will never allow them. Like, they're the ones framing. And by the way, we're talking about 10 years from now is when that will happen. You know how much can change in 10 years? How many people can be pushed out and arrested and detained and disappeared? The point is, you'll have a situation where you'll be left with people willing to do whatever you're told, or people that will keep fighting back. And then that will be the excuse for why it never happens. This is manufacturing this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's what they've always done, like Zbigniew Brzezinski was highlighting. The plan states that this phase will take the place on the condition that the Palestinian Authority approves its ability to carry out de-radicalization. Okay, so you have to de-radicalize the people, which means what? The people that don't believe, that means all Palestinians, that if they can prove they've de-radicalized their society. How is this different than the Uyghur conversation in China? It's not. You're talking about average Palestinians who you don't like. They're trying to frame them as all dangerous, but while claiming you're protecting them from Hamas, but claiming them all Hamas. You get the point of all of this. It's a exercise in futility, and they know what they're doing. They've done it 3 or 4 times already. Now it says the final phase. So realize we're 10, 15 years out by now. The Palestinians will manage the Gaza Strip independently. Now, how many want to bet that you'll never get there? That they'll have 45 arguments that are why they're just too dangerous to allow. It's the same thing they're saying now. Oh, and they'll join the Abraham Accords, which means they'll have to normalize with Israel, which they'll never do. So there you go. There's 1,000 things that will show you that it'll just never happen, and they'll blame them for everything. The hawkish wing of the government apparently is expected not even to support it. So it's possible that even that won't even be allowed to happen because Smotrich and Ben-Gvir that we're constantly calling out are screaming to murder all of them anyway. It's just frustrating that we can't have an honest conversation about this when it's this obvious. Now, I guess there was the last couple parts here. I think the point was, it says they stated that Netanyahu refrained from speaking about this publicly. Now, why would that be? If your whole point is about, it's because this is an agenda. This is not about the Palestinians at all, and it's about trying to make sure you have the right moment and cultivating the perception of it before you put out the lie, in my opinion. Now, it says the authors of the plan emphasize that through it, Israel will be able to achieve long-term security in the South. Right, so it's not about Palestinians at all. It's about Israel trying to achieve what it wants. How is that not clear? It says the U.S., for its part, will stabilize the Middle East and achieve dominance in the region. Oh, good. More power for the U.S. More, this is showing you their real face. Alongside the realization that the Biden administration's vision for a trade corridor between India and the Middle East. Right. So it's all about you. But the Palestinians can be controlled for 15 years and we'll give them something and we'll call it for them. We'll say it's about Palestinian self-determination. It says on the one page of the, I think it was the point about the Gaza 2030 vision that's noted, and it's written that while Iran is spreading radicalism and instability from the Northeast, the Middle East is turning southwest. That's not even remotely true. It's just so embarrassing, the narrative they try to set. The Middle East it's objectively turning against Israel in every possible way. Even the governments like Egypt and the rest of them are not able to control the very overwhelmingly obvious anti-Israel sentiment from their people. Wildly justified today, not Jewish, Israeli, Zionist. But it says the utopian vision, which is also somewhat reminiscent of the dreams that existed after the disengagement plan and before the Hamas government was elected. That's the point. It's the same damn stuff, guys. Oh, man. What happened there? Oh, it just forced refresh. That's what happened. Typical. Always changing things. That's how this works. Let me get back to it. We're almost done with this last part. And then, interestingly enough, here's what it says. Solar fields. Oh, and it says alongside the development of the gas reservoirs, which we all knew was part of this. So they're literally going to create the seaport. Oh, I skipped this part. Hold on. Yeah, so just right here, it says the masterminds of the plan, they believe that it will be possible to build railroads from the Gaza to the seaport and airport in nearby Al Arish alongside the development of the gas reservoirs, of course, which will do. All the revenue will only go to the United States and Israel at the expense of everybody else, of course, just like with all of Africa. Solar fields in the Sinai will provide energy for regional desalination plants. The reconstruction of Gaza will require raw materials and services from the Gulf countries, which will create demand and opportunity. So you're just folding in other entities. And the bottom line is none of this goes to help the Palestinians. None of them want this. They don't want you to build a world for them that they have to live in. They want to build their own world. They want self-determination. They want their land back, guys. It's quite obvious. This is as a case study, the creators of the program point out that it will be possible, for example, to produce electric vehicles in the Gaza Strip now. Oh, good. We can start pumping out the other things we're going to push to the rest of the world from a place that doesn't want it. The manufacturing companies will set up the factories and infrastructure in the north. So we're going to start building our companies there. Are we still talking about 4 Palestinians? Well, let's pretend. It's just so gross and obvious what's happening. And the bottom line is to talk about the Marshall Plan, the finishing point, I should say. Just want to highlight some points. No, there's obvious overlaps and things you could argue ended up in the positive for certain people, but I want to recognize that even in the context of things like the post-World War II conversation, U.S. economic interests were clearly part of the focal point. Some argue the Marshall Plan was motivated by U.S. economic interests, particularly the desire to create a market for American goods and services in the places that they were then manipulating. This has led some to accuse the U.S. of the plan to promote its own economic interests at the expense of European nations. I think that's very obvious, even if you think this was overall positive for the area. Now, at other point, the CIA has interestingly received 5% of the funds that were allocated for the Marshall Plan, which has raised concerns about the agency's involvement in the plan and potential misuse of funds. You know how much that money is? This is what we constantly see. I'm willing to bet you it's a hell of a lot more than 5%. And then in general, lack of transparency. Some critics have argued that the Marshall Plan lacked transparency and accountability, so we don't even truly know, because there was no oversight, how the funds were actually spent. We get narratives about how it was spent. Now, how do you think this is going to be any different? They're comparing it to the Marshall Plan. Now, it's a smaller example, but at the end of the day, we all know where this goes. And if we actually talk about some honest development, this would come back to the original 67 conversation, or if you want to go back further and argue that Palestine should get all their land back, which I honestly don't agree with because of the other dynamics, but legally that's correct. But either way, that would be an honest engagement. The idea that they can give them the West Bank and Gaza, or give them, the point is truly give them something they control. What's their argument? Well, we can't allow them to do it because they're going to do it again. Well, you're talking about Hamas, though, not Palestinians, right? Oops. You conflate those every time. Palestinians, we can't let them have their own land because then we're in danger. It's not true. But then how does this change? Well, the obvious reality is within 15 years, we'll either squash everybody there, turn them into something else, or pretend they're still dangerous. So let's get on board. The one thing it doesn't change, Palestinians do not get self-determination. The only thing they're asking for. It's not hard to see how this goes, guys. It's quite obvious to me that this is only going to get worse until people stand up and and just call out the self-evident reality. Now, even then, we already see that's not changing until the end. The true end of this is not changing because we're allowing it to continue. But the more we fight, the more we call this out, the more we're seeing pressure, the more we're seeing other people recognize that they are able to call it out, or maybe they're seeing it for the first time. But I can see things shifting. I've never seen a more clear moment of when what we're doing is directly affecting the outcome, and it's time to not let the two-party illusion scream you down from caring about that. Stand up and fight for it. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.